Hey, what's up, y'all? So, my name is Diamond Styles. I go live sometimes, usually every Friday at 7, but sometimes in the middle of the week, we do live discussions about book chapters. And so, this Sunday, today, I'm going to do a book called A Queer History of the United States by Michael Bronski. I have a particular chapter that I want to discuss, and it's chapter two, and it's called Sexually Ambiguous Revolution. Now, it's going to discuss slavery, it's going to discuss the early part of this country's inception. Um, and yeah, so we're going to talk about that. And so I would like y'all to participate and enjoy reading the book. So, yes, hey, CL, how is everyone? Make sure as you come in, you thumbs up. I am great. Hello, hello, hello. This is my amazing shirt. Our pussy's our choice. I got it in Amsterdam, and it's usually never, and it's really high quality, and the fabric is so nice. I rarely get a chance to wear it because it's rarely this hot, this cold in Houston. So we're enjoying the um, January cold. So I was like, "Ooh, I get to wear my sweater." And I love it. Yes, 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 yes. Hey, Brandon. Hey, Trishan, Andre. Doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. I got kicked out of a restaurant because of this sweater, this sweatshirt. I felt good. I felt like she looks. They kicked me out because I said that my sweater was vulgar. All because some boobs. Oh well. Yes, it's been cold here in Houston. Absolutely. It's been really cold. Yeah. We're gonna give some folks a chance to come in. As you come in, make sure you thumbs up. We're gonna start in about 2.5 minutes, three, somewhere around there. I have been feeling quite relaxed. I have come off this trip and I feel relaxed and I feel the beginning of this year has gone really good. I have a friend. Y'all have seen my friend. Y'all haven't seen him in a long time, but I used to bring a guy on here that I was dating, Denise, and we would like, I think there's a video called like Us at Denny's. um, his sister passed away today. And it's really, really awkward. I think there's a video where I talk about his mom thinks I'm a witch. Do y'all remember that video? His mom thinks I'm a witch. This is him. But yeah, his sister passed away today. And so me and him had a long, interesting conversation today. But it's ironic because I don't want to say ironic. That's not the right word. It's random because we also last week had a long and interesting conversation because his mom. So me and him haven't really been like kind of talking. Not on, we. It's no negative. We've been friends for so long and the relationship wasn't going nowhere, so we just kind of separated. Um, so, and one of the reasons why we separated is because he was. I don't really know how to describe it, but basically, he just kept. He's treating me like a relationship, but to his people, he keeps emphasizing that we're just friends. They know my tea. Um, it was a bunch of stuff that went on, and so My mind is if we're just friends, then you need to stop treating me like we in a relationship because it's that confuses me and it's just I don't like it. So I'm out. So we hadn't really talked a lot. And so we recently talked because for whatever reason, even though me and him are not like kind of talking anymore, we haven't been kind of like a thing since probably like it had to be pre-COVID, I want to say, and COVID shit was 5 years ago. So it was probably 2017, 18 since we last kind of was like kicking it tough and that kind of stuff. Um, but his mother seems to find me everywhere. Like whatever app I'm on, she will find me. You know how like when somebody's number in your phone, you have to they will pop up in the apps. So apparently he had to have given her my number or something because every app that I'm on, she will find me and follow me. Even though I don't talk to him no more, even though when me and him was dating, she was really, really emphasizing to him uh, to make a long story short, when she found out my tea, she thought that he didn't know my tea, and he did know my tea. And so um she kind of confronted him about my tea to kind of spill my tea to him when he already knew. But he played it off like because he's dumb. he he played it off like he didn't know my tea. Like not that he didn't know that yeah, that she was giving him new information. And so he was like, "Oh, for real?" He was like, "Well, that's just my friend." Going back to what I was saying, how he was kind of playing me like I was a friend, even though we were more than friends. So, and so her response to him saying, "Oh, that's just my friend. We cool." Her response was, "Oh, okay. Well, long as y'all keep it on a friend level and y'all don't make this a boyfriend and girlfriend thing." Even though he would take me to her birthday parties, he would take me to her because she's a singer. He would take me. She's a jazz singer. He would take me to her like events, like her singing events. She older. She in her 70s now. And so one of the interesting thing that's happening now is that she was following me. You get what I'm saying? Like she followed me on TikTok, da 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 da. So I sent him a screenshot of her starting to follow me again because we joke about it now that we cool. I was like, look at your mama. Here she goes. She don't found me on TikTok, and he's laughing, da da da. We go back and forth. It's funny. And so his sister, one of the times when I went to his mom's birthday party, and remember, we're at like a not remember, but we're at like this kind of like club. It's like a club with a bunch of people in it, and she's having a birthday party at the club because she's like a I don't want to say she imagine having not a celebrity, but imagine somebody being a local singer. So they're almost like a legend, but not, they never got famous. That's how she is. People know her to be a citywide singer, but they just never got famous. And so she performs still, but people in the city know her, but that's how she is. So we went to the club and it was her birthday and people were there. She's older. She's like in her 60s and da 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 da. And she's still kind of jazzy or whatever, fly. And so when I come in, she tried to she tried to she relayed to her daughters because she has two girls and a boy. He's the baby. She relayed to her daughters my tea, of course, and she was emphasizing that he said, "Oh, that they were just friends." But imagine bringing me, young, hot, and me and him the same age, because this is 15 years ago. um, young, hot, feeling bad as fuck coming in, and he's bringing me in, and he's treating me like his girlfriend, arms around the waist, leading me to my seat, buying my drinks, sitting next to him. He got his arm around me. Around, I'm sitting there looking fly, heels, hair, beat, sickening. He got his arm around me. You get what I'm saying? He's treating me like his girlfriend. And so the sister comes up to me and she's introduces herself. He introduces her to me when she comes up, and it's this moment where she was like, "Oh, it's nice to finally meet you." She's super super nice. These are church folks, so they're not messy, but they are not. They will, if they have something negative to say, it's going to be behind your back. It's not going to be in your face. They're going to be real cordial in your face. Very church nice nasty. You know how that goes. And so the sister comes up and she's nice and she's talking to me. Of course, they done spilled my tea to her and da 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 da. Da. And so I hear the sister say, as the night goes on, I hear the sister say, "That's not just his friend." Because she can tell how he's engaging with me. That's not just his friend. That's mama, you tripping. That's not you tripping. He's just telling you that because you're being nosy. I hear her kind of checking her mom, like, you're being nosy. And so he just told you that was his just his friend, but that's not just his friend. He don't act like this around his friends. This is something special. So stay out of their business. I hear her tell her daughter that. I mean, her mom that. And so it was just these moments of we're not just friends in our relationship and da da da. So anyway, I say all of that. That sister passed away today. I'm not real close to her, of course not. Um, but anytime she met me, and I think I met her at two of her mother's events and at that party. And so anytime she met me, she was super, super nice. And so, I think she was one of the people in his inner circle that was, I don't want to say she was like, oh my God, rooting for the trans woman. But every time that he told me something about her, it was her being like, mind your business. Like that is, regardless of what you think about it, mind your business. Clearly, he's not stopping messing with her. He's still engaging with her because he would do shit like come and pick me up from the airport when his mom was in the car. So anybody who was trying to keep me a secret would at least went and dropped her off and then came and picked me up. No, he would come and pick me up or come pick me up and then go pick her up, the mom, from work. I would have to get out of the front seat and let his mom be in the front seat because I'm not riding shotgun with your mom in the car. Disrespectful for me to put her in the front seat. So we would have situations like that where I was kind of proving myself as a respectful girl. And the daughter would hear about these situations through the mom because the mom is coming telling her. And she would always be like, I mean, she's super nice and respectful. She sounds like she's super nice. And every time I see her, she's sweet. So, uh, I think you just should mind your business. Let him do his thing. He's grown. And then we were grown. We was in our 30s. He's grown. So it was she passed away. And so it's like, and he don't have no real like um he has friends, but they don't really be fucking with him like that. and so um and so he hit me up and we had a long conversation, and he asked me would I come to the funeral, um because we basically, anyway, he asked me would I come to the funeral because a lot of times if you dealt with somebody passing, especially if it's somebody in the circle of your family, sometimes you need people outside of that situation that's just there for you. Because if it's somebody connected to your family, they're going to try to be there for all of y'all. And sometimes you need somebody just there for you. And so we're having this, I don't want to say rekindling, but a reconnection based on his grieving. And so yeah, it was kind of sad, but and the crazy part is she's passing away this week, and him and his sister have the same exact birthday. So his mama had a child on the same day. 10 years apart. Because she's the oldest sister and he's the youngest baby, the youngest brother. And so they had a birthday like next week. And so she's passing at this time. So they're going to be burying his sister on the week of his and her birthday. And so it's just a sad moment. Yeah. So it's kind of wild. Yeah. So we'll see what's up and we'll see how that works out. But anyway, let's get started. Y'all ready to get started? Now, this book, it's wordy, but I think we can discuss it as we listen and we go from there. But we're going to do one chapter. We're going to do one chapter, and like I said, it's called "Sexually Ambiguous Revolution," and it's talking about the early era of the United States, and because when we go further into the book, which we will, this chapter sets the foundation of how things starts to change for queer people and things that impact queer people. What I want to emphasize, and they do it a little bit, is how racism and the racism of America um, let, warped the foundation of how people accepted queer people in the country. How it was all connected. You know how people always be like, why y'all always want to bring up race? Race plays a big part in the culture of this country, race and religion. Um, and so this kind of describes, and gender, of course. So race, religion, and gender, how they kind of intertwine to create the culture that we have now. And so I wanted to, because this kind of does a great job in exploring the history and moments of how those things shifted. And is this particular chapter kind of explores those ideas. So yes, so that's what we're about to do. Y'all ready? Let's start. And the chapter is about 50 minutes long. We're gonna pause it and discuss and blah 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 blah. I hope you get it together and propose to you one day. Other than that friend thing, it sounds like y'all are a nice fit. We are not Camille. We are cool, but there is other than that. We get along and we cool, but intellectually we are not equally yoked. If I was with him, it would be me settling for somebody just because I get along with them. Sometimes that's what you got to settle for, but I don't want to. So, yeah, that's where we are. We cool. He looks good. We cool, but I don't. I would be settling. Y'all ready? Let's go.
2. Sexually ambiguous revolutions. The transition from the colonial period to the revolutionary era, during which a daring political experiment took root, led to the emergence of a new nation.
Can y'all hear it?
Fundamental to this new nation was the reshaping of ideas about gender and sexual behavior as they related to the political concept of the citizen. The period from the Pilgrim's Landing to the early 18th century was a time of enormous population growth. In 1700, the Anglo-European population in the Northeast was 250,000. By 1720, that number had almost doubled to 475,000. This surge in population was accompanied by the rapid growth of cities. By 1725, the population of Boston was over 12,000, nearly doubled from 6,700 in 1700. Philadelphia was home to 10,000 people. New York, although growing rapidly, had just 7,000 residents. By 1800, it would have 60,000. In 1760, colonists numbered 1.5 million, 6 times the population at the turn of the century. This expansion of colonies and people meant that the influence of Puritanism was waning. Many of the newer colonies were founded on non-Puritan beliefs. In 1682, Charles II granted wealthy English Quaker William Penn a large tract of land west of what is now New Jersey. Penn named it Sylvania for its densely wooded terrain, and then renamed it Pennsylvania after his father. Like many of the colonies, Pennsylvania was a commercial venture that was intended to turn a profit for its investors, in this case, through the trading of furs and lumber.
Okay, I want y'all to clock that because we're talking about the history of Rhode Island is wild as fuck, and Boston, but they just called out something that they literally gave this man a plot of land, a Quaker, that, remember, during this time in white culture there was Puritans and Quakers, and usually the Puritans come from the Protestant um denomination of Christianity. And if y'all remember one of our previous chats, we talked about how a lot of the people who were coming over to the New World, coming over to Turtle Island, coming over here to this land, trying to explore it and take it from the natives. We know the history. Um, um, they were running from, quote unquote, the more progressive Catholicism, and they wanted to keep the English Protestant. We talked about that on the episode that I was talking about the Pearl. So if you listen to the episode, and I also made a playlist of these types of lives. So if you like the book chapter lives, I made a playlist called books and live chat. So I made a playlist for that. So if you want to check them all out, but yeah, so we talked about how the people who were coming over here, the English people, Great Britain, da, 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 those people who were coming over here, they were running from the progressive um, Roman Catholic type of religious church. They wanted to come over here and bring that Puritan idea, that Protestant idea, that whole. This was a new land that they wanted to explore and bring those kind of ideologies over to America. But also, this is why this is we're talking about the birth of the American project. Okay, America as it is relatively a new country, and its way of doing things governmentally. At the time, it was, yes, that is a that is an interesting combo because at the time they were more progressive than the Protestant. Um, but the American project, it was starting off to they had these ideologies, these Puritan ideologies, but they also wanted to separate from the monarchy, the idea of there is one family king to rule the rest of us. They wanted to get rid of that. They didn't want, when it comes to the American Revolution, they didn't want to be ruled by a king. So this is why democracy, the idea of a democracy, the idea of voting, the idea of a constitution was kind of like brought to the fore, because they wanted to be against the exploitation of the monarchy. You get what I'm saying? So this is being birthed, and these ideas in this new land was becoming something. Um, was becoming to was be was all being birthed at the same time, along with this new, more intense racism, different type of racism. It doesn't mean that in Europe being against the Moors and the Africans was didn't exist. It existed, but in the new world, new it it started to warp into something that we are the racism that we see today in America. And so I want y'all to understand that this is what we're describing, what we're discussing today. um Yeah, so Quakers, so in this time, Quakers was one of the only subset groups in America who were against slavery. They were the ones who, they were like, we don't fuck with that slavery stuff. We religious, but that slavery shit, we don't really fuck with that. We think that that's wrong. So most Quakers in this area of time were some of the earlier abolitionists. uh, Queer connection is Bayard Rustin was raised by a Quaker family.
Penn's charter for the new colony
Oh,
reflected his.
my point of bringing that up, since we was talking about Penn, we just talked about Pennsylvania. Why? Imagine they gave him a land, and then here we go in this day and time creating this state called Pennsylvania after this man. And the irony of this man being a Quaker, remember I told you he's the early abolitionist. It is not a coincidence that this area becomes the swing state where it's kind of like that kind of middle ground. Do you see what I'm saying? So Penn got the land and it grew into what we see now. So this type of I want you to pay attention to how these things, this American history, this shit is in the fabric of what we do. And even in the small shit that we are that we kind of think of, oh, that's just a name. No, bitch. The man who got the land was named Penn, and he named it Sylvania, and now it's called Pennsylvania. Like these white men in this time who were privileging, being privileged and building their wealth off of racism, even the ones who, not necessarily him being a slave owner, but the structure of the government and the structure. Looks, this entity gave him the land. Do you see what I'm saying? Even though he may not be the slave owner, you get what I'm saying? He still benefited off the structure of the government that was going on now, and it led to us having a Pennsylvania. And so I want you to pay attention to that stuff. Not only when we're reading this, but when you're reading about the history of, anything, how it kind of let. So when people act like these things are not connected, or wow, that was so many years ago, but it's still impacting us today. Yes.
His progressive Quaker views. There was freedom of religion for all who believed in God, and a constitution that called for two houses of government and that allowed, in the spirit of a Quaker meeting, open discourse. Most important, Penn treated the native peoples of the area, primarily the Lenni Lenape, called the Delaware tribe by the Anglo settlers, with respect, buying land from them rather than attacking and taking it. Pennsylvania grew quickly as Quakers from all over Europe settled it.
Clock that. Clock that. So when we talk about things that's just how they did back then. No, motherfucker, that's how certain people did. Some people, not saying this was right or wrong, or no, I'm saying this is right, but not saying that every way was right or wrong. But you just heard that he bought land in the Pennsylvania area from the Indians. He didn't just take it. He says, "Oh, I don't want to go this way of even though it's still kind of colonizing, um, in the sense of being connected to them, but I want to do this a different way. The Native Americans who are in this land, I want to pay them for their land." And so he did, and they sold it to him. Now, there's some spiciness to it, because if you remember, I told y'all in the book, the book that we were reading called Stoned, about the Pearl and Queen Elizabeth and her sister Mary, Queen Mary. I told y'all in the beginning of that book, we didn't do that chapter, but in the beginning of that book, giving you the context of what the book was about. The book was about how things that we colonizing with a bit of integrity. Yes and no, because you got to understand that native nations, it was many nations on this land, on Turtle Island, this whole North America. There was many nations, and it was not uncommon for people from other nations to, buy land, sell land, or acquire land from other nations. So imagine if Europe was considered, or Africans. That's why we see dark skinned people down in Florida in the Seminole tribe, because Africans were coming over here already. And imagine, and another, we got to understand that a lot of the history that we're being told is from the lens of European history. So let's do that. But in Native Americans selling land to another tribe or another type of people, that wasn't uncommon. Like trading and da 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 da, that wasn't uncommon. If you read Native American narratives and the history that they write themselves, they talk about it and they talk about how um they just didn't know what this was going to turn into. Do you see what I'm saying? We didn't know that it was about to be this thing, but we just saw some new people and okay, y'all want to buy the land. And so in the beginning of that book in Stone, they talked about how Manhattan was sold to Europeans, the island of Manhattan that we know of as New York right now. They bought that land with beads, like literal beads. Because in the Native American culture, money wasn't a thing. The shillings and the money, that wasn't a thing. They traded shit for, when they traded shit, like stuff that they valued. Understand? It's kind of like when Africans was using cowrie shells for money. And imagine you're a European who found a ton of cowrie shells. Like, oh, you're gonna let me buy your land for these cowrie shells? Because you don't give a fuck about cowrie shells, because that's not your form of money. That's what happened to the island of Manhattan. They bought the island of Manhattan from Native Americans with beads, beads that they had tons of because they used beads on gowns and shit. They didn't use beads as money. So them giving Native Americans beads as money was their way of paying the Native American for the island of Manhattan. So they paid them for it, but they paid them something that they didn't care about. Once they learned that, oh, y'all care about these beads, because that was their form of money. Y'all clocking that T? So they did buy it, but they bought it with something that they didn't give a fuck about because it wasn't European standard of money. And that book also talks about how in the Dutch area, the reason why the Dutch have like a tulip museum, like if you go to Amsterdam, I love Amsterdam. It's one of my favorite cities in the world. If you go to Amsterdam, they have a museum about tulips, and if you want to see the tulip fields and all that kind of stuff, you go there in March, like March or between March and May, and you will see all of these beautiful tulips. There's like tulip fields and da 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 da, because tulips was a form of money at one time in the Dutch areas, like actual tulip bulbs, tulips, the flower was actually their money, and their economy crashed at one point in their existence because the weather wore out the tulips. So what everybody so it's just quite interesting. Read that book. It's called Stone. But I wanted to say this because that's important to this story, what was going on. So I wanted to emphasize all of these nuances of how um we these things were intertwined, and we can see the remnants of these things in our culture now.
There, joined by Catholics, Amish, Mennonites, and Jews. Penn designed Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, denoting many faiths, between 1682 and 1684. Within 50 years, it was the second largest urban area in the colonies. Progressive Quaker views on religious freedom and abolition, and later sexual freedom, would be a strong influence on American political thought. This rapid growth and diversity meant that the social and religious cohesiveness of the early colonies was lost. The Puritans' strict social demands on the individual were waning and being questioned. The infamous Salem witch trials of 1692 and 1693, in which 20 people were executed and 5 more died in prison, were a grim manifestation of the excesses of the Puritan imagination. However, the Massachusetts General Court issued a public apology for the trials 5 years later and eventually granted monetary compensation to the families of those executed.
Clock that T. So uh, the courts paying people back for their wrong bullshit indiscretions, it's really, really common. So when we talk about Black people wanting reparations and motherfuckers telling us that, oh, you should let forget about it or let that shit go. No, motherfuckers, y'all gave it to so many other people. And I'm not the first person to say this, but y'all did this. Is a common thing for y'all to do, and for y'all to keep saying that y'all can't do it for us or keep trying not to figure out how to do it for us is bullshit, because y'all do it for every motherfucking body else. Y'all tried to kill these witches, 20 people that y'all said was heretics and witches, and y'all apologized and gave them monetary compensation at the Salem witch trials 5 years later. So y'all did it for the Japanese. Y'all did it for y'all. Do it. So do it for us.
The 1682 Pennsylvania sodomy law did away with the death penalty for sodomy and replaced it with a whipping, 6 months of hard labor, and the forfeiture of a third of the accused's estate. 32 years later, Pennsylvania made sodomy a capital crime again, reflecting changing demographics and belief systems. The growing assemblage of people, social structures, and political entities fostered a sense of pluralism unique to the colonies. But this pluralism did not reconcile the tension between the freedom of the individual and the need for a strong state formally embodied by the personal moral rectitude of the Puritans. Slaves and citizens. Despite the progressive inclination of some colonies, the persecuting society persisted. Colonists continued their sexualized treatment of native people, sodomy laws proliferated, and the legal, economic, and cultural institution of slavery was introduced into the colonies. It is impossible to understand American history, including the position of LGBT people, without acknowledging the overwhelming, debilitating effect that slavery has had on this country. From the mid-17th century, organized, profit-driven slavery influenced all aspects of American life. Slavery struck at the heart of the ideals of individualism, personal liberty, and equality that were present in sophisticated and rudimentary forms at the birth of the colonies. Slavery was integral to how the colonies, and later the Republic, continued to reconceptualize individual freedom, race, property, and the rights and responsibilities of citizenship. From the 16th to the 19th century, over 650,000 Africans were brought to North America as slaves. However, this is a relatively small number compared to the 12 million Africans who were transported and sold, mostly in the Caribbean and South America, in the mid-Atlantic slave trade, also referred to as the First Middle Passage. Slavery arose in the colonies hand in hand with both European and African indentured servitude, which was commonplace. In the 17th and 18th centuries, more than half of all white European, mostly British, immigrants to the colonies were indentured servants. These were often rural people who, dispossessed of their land and unemployed, were living in poverty in English cities. Their indenture, a contractual agreement with the person or firm who brought them to the colonies, lasted 5 years, after which they were free. In the mid to late 17th century, laws in the colonies began to change. In 1654, a Virginia court declared that John Kacer, an African servant, was legally a slave for life.
All right, so I want to pause right there because this is just the nuance of our history. Because white people love to be like, oh, Irish people were slaves. Ooh, Jewish people were slaves. Ooh, white people were slaves too. Yes, at some point in this country, prior to the law starting to shift and change and creating this second class citizenship, everybody who was, poor or like a peasant or working for this noblesman, they were coming over here and they could have been indentured servants. They could have been. You know what I'm saying? Jews, Irish, Italians, they could have been indentured servants. But that started to shift. If you watch the movie, is it Gangs of New York or Kings of New York? I can't remember what was his name? Is it Leonardo DiCaprio? I think it's Leonardo DiCaprio. Gangs of New York. Like that while it is a fictional um movie, it Kings of New York. Thank you. While it's a fictional movie, what's the time and how they share what they show you is how the Irish was demonized at the time. Gangs by Swarovski. Thank you. Yeah, I thought it was gangs too. But it's telling you how at the time even Irish people were seen as negative, and we start to see how they shift in power by even becoming like police officers. That's why being a police officer, overseer in that way, because we know that comes from slavery too. That police watch the documentary called The 13th Amendment. It would kind of give you some of that history, but it's other ones too. Um, but it's very common because they started make the laws to make whiteness a thing and blackness a thing, that patty rollers, yes, that's where paddy wagons, rollers, yes, that's where it comes from, because Irish were the ones who were the Irish people, not just Irish but Italians too. um um they were the people who were becoming the overseers. They were not the Anglo-Saxon white folks that were in political power, like the Thomas Jeffersons and da 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 da. They were not those people. They were the ones that were kind of in that indentured service class, and they started to have more power with the change in laws, and so they were becoming overseers, chasing after slaves, black slaves particularly, and then they were becoming the laws. They was becoming the police as the state police as we know it today. They were becoming these things. That's why we see even all the way up until like the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s in this country that there was a lot of Irish police officers. There was a lot. That's why we get the paddy wagon and da 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 da. We this Italians and that Italian and Irish clash, and we start to see how it was a passed down culture of Irish people being in that kind of middle before they kind of integrated into whiteness. That's why if you look at your bloodline, if you get your DNA done, you're gonna see a lot. You're gonna see some Irish in your bloodline. Great Britain, Irish, all that kind of shit. You're gonna see it because they were poor in the ghettos with us too. Yes.
Gradually, African indentured servants became legally treated as slaves, with no possibility of ending their servitude. This shift occurred for a number of complex reasons, the most pertinent of which is that Africans, in contrast to indentured whites, had no outside social and cultural support systems of other Africans in the country, and thus were more easily enslaved. Contemporary European societies had not promoted or regulated persecution on this large scale. By 1860, the slave population in the United States had grown to 4 million, a third of the population in the 15 out of 33 states that sanctioned slavery. In some states, slaves were in the majority. In 1720, just under 70% of South Carolina's population was enslaved. Slavery was also tied to religious belief. Virginia ruled in 1682 that all servants, which shall be imported into this country either by sea or by land, whether Negroes, Moors, mulattoes, or Indians, who and whose parentage and native countries are not Christian at the time of their first purchase by some Christian, and all Indians, which shall be sold by our neighboring Indians, or any other trafficking with us for slaves, are hereby adjudged, deemed, and taken to be slaves to all intents and purposes, any law, usage, or custom to the contrary notwithstanding.
All right, so I want to talk about that because they're talking about the types of slaves. They said Moors, Africans, da 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 da, Indians, because when they were talking about Indians, they were also bringing people from other places that were Indian, like from the Caribbean, bringing them to the United States, from even further south in South America, bringing them up to United States. And so they were making laws to make sure that these motherfuckers, wherever they come, and Indians who had some power when we hadn't went into the lands, when we hadn't went further west, and the Indians who had power and who was there's a documentary on PBS about the buffalo. Oh, please watch it. I don't really remember the name, but it's a documentary about buffalo and the history of buffalo in North America. They really go into um deeper context and how important the buffalo was to Native Americans. We know that, but they go into even more detail and how, you get what I'm saying, these battles were fought. And they were talking about how there was a time when they hadn't gone further west, like they hadn't dis- discovered, they hadn't went further west. It was just these early colonies, just this on the east coast of the United States. And so this was a gradual thing. So sometimes based on and there was a there's a book that I got called Sex, Love, and Race by Martha Rhodes. And they talk about how it was different strategies. There were some people who were coming in guns a-blazing to take over land. And some people were coming in like the last of the Mohicans and coming in and building friendships with Native Americans and talking and sharing cultures. Da, 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 da. And then once I get cool with you, I bring the armies in and wear you out. It was so many different strategies. And so, and sometimes that these Native Americans could be selling some of their people to be in service, not understanding slavery in the way that they might. You get what I'm saying? Sometimes people, it was an industry where I'm selling my slaves and know what's going on. And then sometimes I don't know what's going on. I'm just selling you people that's in my tribe. Oh, you need some, we need the firearms. You need some people. So here you go. They don't know they're bringing them to the colonies and they picking kind or however that works. They may not know the nuances of what's going on. And because this is a slow culture shift that is happening, some people were oblivious and some people didn't. Some people didn't know what was going on because they didn't know what was growing. Because these white motherfuckers didn't know what was going on either. They were playing it as they go. it what I hate for people to think was these just was intuitive minded people and oh, we're so smart that we came and created this country off the backs of people. That's not what the fuck it was. It was a slowly in the same the way that our country is slowly moving to the right now. It was a slow thing where they're playing the propaganda game. They are playing the game of convincing people, just like right now, to come over to our side. It is a battle. It is a battle of minds. It's a battle of these Quaker motherfuckers, the ideology, not necessarily just the Quaker, but the ideology of what is right and wrong, and then the ideology of the Puritan ideology, not necessarily Christian, not necessarily, but these ideologies of how we are supposed to engage as a culture because we're coming over here making some new shit. And so there is a propaganda machine, even now, just like now, there is a propaganda machine to convince people to be on our side. And once you give people a certain amount of power and make a difference between us because of whiteness, then that power allows me to invest. Now I have a invested interest to be able to make rules to keep me in power. Got it? So it's not like, oh my God, we had this amazing planned out thing. No, it took us centuries to fucking create what this is based on these rules that we were like they just was talking about. These rules were just these laws were being made off the cuff. Like, oh, we want to be able to do this and we want to be able to control what is happening. And so that's why when we talk about propaganda, this is important of we, or anybody shifts our culture, and it has been happening for about people for centuries, not just here in America, but um even other countries prior to America existing, how the propaganda of how they talked about Native Americans allowed people to turn their eye to things that they were doing wrong to Native Americans. This is what indoctrinates us into thinking that it's okay to hate trans people, indoctrinate us to think that gay people are pedophiles and the scum of the earth, buggery, and all of these things. All of this stuff is propaganda to get people to invest in it and turn a blind eye to something that they may think is wrong if we didn't prepare their minds to, if we didn't use this propaganda to convince their minds. Do you see what I'm saying? And this is just how it has always been. And how it is now. How do we convince the public to be against immigrants and think that they're taking all of our jobs, even though they're not? To think that they're taking all of our resources, even though they're not. How do we convince them to vote in our favor? So would you call the transatlantic slave trade, for the most part, a fluke? I wouldn't call it a fluke, but I wouldn't call it a fluke. What I would call it is a business that grew in the same way that Amazon and fast fashion has grown into something that's wearing our environment out. The fast fashion, it started off with somebody learning how to mass produce this one thing, and then Jeff Bezos and other companies like Zara and Timu and blah blah blah, these companies learning from a model of mass producing shit, and then everybody getting on the bandwagon. Shein, da 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 da. Everybody getting on the bandwagon. It's not about it being a fluke. It's about, oh, we learn how to make money. We learn how to do this thing, this model that's working, and then people just start repeating it. Oh, we got this many slaves and they're able to produce this much with cotton. So damn, why don't we get some pirates? We just talked about, we in the previous thing, how Elizabeth was had this group of pirates that she can hide behind, that can take slaves and take people and loot things for her because they were in her hire, and bam, it's making me money. And so these what, it's just a business that was growing, and people wanting money, and the greed of money and the greed of what's happening with this business is just growing. It's not a fluke, it's just how capitalism works. Got it? So I wouldn't call it a fluke. It's just that people, this, it was a business model that was making somebody money. People wanted to repeat it, and so it grew.
Lawmakers in the colonies were constructing a separate class of non-white, non-Christian people to be an economic bulwark of free labor. They had several reasons. A growing landowning class that did not want the competition of a new class of freed indentured servants. A shift, mostly in southern states, to agricultural products such as tobacco and cotton that were labor-intensive.
Business.
And a massive westward expansion of colonies that needed labor. Except for Quakers, most colonists did not consider slavery contradictory to Christian theology. Its proponents justified the practice by citing verses in the Hebrew Bible and the Gospels, including Genesis, chapter 9, verse 25 to 27, in which Noah's grandson Canaan is condemned to slavery. Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves will he be to his brothers. The biblical justifications for slavery, not unlike the biblical justifications for the condemnation of same-sex sexual activity, were used to both enforce draconian laws and justify extraordinarily harsh punishments. Because slaves were deemed to be property, slaveholders had unlimited legal power over them, including the right to sell them for profit and separate them from their loved ones. Thus, slaves were denied the basic right of maintaining relationships with their biological and chosen families. Slave owning was not simply a matter of personal property, but was woven into the social fabric of the Republic. For example, laws held slave owners accountable for not punishing runaway slaves, since such behavior was seen as a threat to public safety. It would be inaccurate and unwise to make strict parallel claims for the oppression of slaves and gay people. But the extensive legal and social effects of slavery have shaped the social and political context of America today. The acceptance of slavery as a philosophical concept and political reality laid the groundwork for the justification of othering, designating a group of people as different, placing them outside of the legal, social, and moral framework granting full citizenship.
Okay. Clock what they're talking about. They said we don't want to make these things seem exactly like they're the same thing because black people love, especially heterosexual cisgender black people, love to complain about gay people making the parallels between slavery or treatment of black people and the treatment of queer people. As somebody who is black and queer, I say fuck them. They're just trying to make an excuse. It's not saying that it is exactly the same, but this is the connection that they are trying to teach you and explain to you. And what I think is important for us to understand and convey is when you have a group of people that you have created laws around oppressing them, it is really, really easy and othering them. It is really, really easy because you have a standard of how you other people and how you oppress people. It's very easy for you just to transfer that othering and legal oppression and systematic oppression to the other another group that you want to oppress. It is easy. Oh, we already got laws that separate them, this group. Let's just transfer those type of laws to this group. And racism, okay, I'm gonna try to clock this because I don't think we talk about this enough. While racism is an emphasized thing in this country, patriarchy is older and more insidious and what's the word, where it's kind of subtle. Is it insidious is the word too, but there's another word and my brain is farting right now. But there's another word where it is not pejorative. Um is it pejorative? No, not pejorative. I don't know. My brain is being weird. Well, I can't think of the word. But where it's so subtle and ingrained and covert is a word, subversive, yes, those are all the words. Yes, 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 yes. We have an amazing English language, but I think it starts with a P. But yes, all those words, subversive, and yes. Um, but yes, but because of the subtleties, um, sometimes we don't pay attention to how these these patriarchal rules are also a model of how we can other, how we can oppress another person, because we have already done it with the female body, with the female sex. We can, you know, make the rules and other people because we've already done it in that way. And the same thing happened when it comes to race, and we can do this to queer people. We can do this, and all of these things are kind of intertwined, and they can reflect and have a parallel and a adjacency where they can be adjacent in how the ruling class can oppress each one of them. Now they can be nuanced and different, but it's easy to, if we already have the laws to reflect this, we can make it another way. hmm we can just put it on some other people. We can just, that's what it is. Okay.
As was the case for both Native people and religious dissenters, othering is the enactment of Moore's persecuting society and Douglas's sequestering of the impure from the pure. The template of othering in slavery has two main effects that apply to LGBT people and other minorities. First, Slavery
Pervasive.
constructed
Yes,
a legal
Ricky.
system that mandated
That's the word.
non-citizenship for slaves, which, after slavery was abolished, evolved into second-class citizenship for African Americans. This denial of citizenship, however, did not release slaves from the obligation of obeying the law, which was often enforced more harshly on them than on full citizens. While racialized slavery, abolished by the ratification of the 13th Amendment to the Constitution in 1865, is clearly the extreme example of non-citizenship, its hierarchical legacies are applied to other marginalized groups throughout U.S. history. Second, the widespread acceptance of legalized slavery reinforced and normalized mainstream society's ideas about moral and sexual inferiority. Just as early Spanish settlers accused native peoples of a natural inferiority and intrinsic sexual immorality, white colonists, even if they were not slaveholders, presumed that Africans were less than human and incapable of moral Christian behavior. To the Europeans, native people and Africans who looked and behaved differently from them were dangerous to the accepted morality of the dominant culture, and therefore they were treated with varying degrees of moral and social scorn. Accusations of sexual immorality often took two forms. The first was the charge of dangerous hypersexuality. In the second, counterintuitive form, the sexual outcast becomes the object of repressed sexual fantasies of the mainstream culture. This was certainly the case in America, in which dominant culture's sexual fantasies were projected onto the sexuality of the enslaved Africans. These myths included prodigious sexual desire in African women and men and, in the post-Civil War years, the idea that all African men were capable of sexual violence and rape. These projections were used by the dominant group as reasons to maintain their position of physical and social power. A primary reason, for instance, why slave owners depicted enslaved women as hypersexual was to justify their right to rape these women. This presumed hypersexuality was the excuse for white men to be sexual with enslaved women and the reason they needed to be controlled. The articulation of these sexual fantasies raised enormous anxiety in the dominant culture, thus making the minority group the target of more physical violence. Under slavery, this violence manifested itself in a pervasive culture of sexual humiliation, sexual harassment, and rape, all used to control and subjugate Africans. Projected sexual fantasies tell us nothing about the Africans or their descendants, but a great deal about the women and men who held them. By othering, European colonists began constructing a new national identity and citizenship premised on a massive displacement of their own sexual and gender anxieties onto marginalized groups. This mixture of erotic fascination and anxiety is embedded in the numerous Indian captivity narratives, such as the best-selling 1682 memoir, A Narrative of the Captivity and Restoration of Mrs. Mary Rowlandson, that were hugely popular from the late 17th century to the end of the 19th century.
Okay, so I want to pause right there because they're talking about books and narratives that was written. This is people were writing this stuff to be propaganda. Like Toni Morrison talks about this, where people are like art is usually the forefront of the battle of ideologies. How people were writing, how people were talking about things are usually the first times that you start to see some of these battles of consciousness about whatever the hot topic is of the culture in the moment. And usually it is going to be artists, it is going to be writers, it is going to be painters, sculptors, it's going to be the artist who is grappling because they're going to be the ones who are grappling with these ideas. And so, especially if they have an agenda to spread, it's going to be like that's why this narrative was the bestseller, because it was it was, what do they call it? Hold on, let me go back.
Began constructing a new national identity and citizenship premised on a massive displacement of their own sexual and gender anxieties.
So the ruling class are trying to justify this negative shit that they're doing and taking over, and we're doing this because we're bringing them to the church. When we think about missionaries going over to Africa, we're bringing them into civilization, but we really bringing them over here to be slaves because we want to make our money. They're trying to create this identity of what is the perfect new American person, and it's going to be white and Christian.
Onto marginalized groups. This mixture of erotic fascination and anxiety is embedded in the numerous Indian captivity narratives, such as the best-selling 1682 memoir, A Narrative of the Captivity and Restoration of Mrs. Mary Rowlandson, that were hugely popular from the late 17th century to the end of the 19th century. These works, usually about European women captured by, then forced to live with, and often marry, native people, excited and titillated European readers as the innocence of white women was threatened by the ravenous and dangerous sexuality of non-white men.
Clock that.
William Bradford saw a similar threat at Marymount with the intermarriage of white men and Native American women. This othering of Native Americans was a major way that colonists conceptualized sexuality and same-sex relationships. In a complex mixture of displaced sexual idealization and fear.
Wait. So I want you to clock that. I want you to clock the idea. I'm looking for this book to show y'all, by the way. But I want y'all to clock the idea of, where the hell is this book? Of them creating this narrative of sexualization, this narrative of how we need to protect white women and their sexuality, because clearly the white women was fucking these native people or these black slaves. They clearly had a sexuality that the white men were threatened by. And so they needed to create these narratives that said, yo, these people are dangerous to the innocence of white women. Because patriarchy also put white women and women in general as a thing to be protected, a thing to be put on a pedestal, a thing that God gave men as gifts. Remember them as helpmates. Remember, a wife is like a gift to the man. The man is the head, and the wife is a gift. So if she's sitting on this pedestal as this femininity, this feminine gift and idea that you're supposed to protect, and she's supposed to be at home, and the only time you're supposed to have sex with her is for procreation and to have babies, it's not supposed to be fornication and fun, then she is in this almost like this cage of patriarchy. And here goes these sexually savage Africans, these sexually savage Native American Indians, and women are human, and so they see these big old dicks, these fine ass men that you done brought them here. You think they're not gonna be playing with them, but we're supposed to protect them and keep them out of the ravenous hands of these men. And so what we need to do is make them seem negative, less than, like you actually fucking animals, while also they're doing it as white men, in order for us to punish the women who are doing it or punish the slaves or the native men that they're sleeping with. We need to be able to create this propaganda that says that this is in the same way that we are doing to queer people now, trans people now. We need a way to convince people that when we jail them and hang them and kill them and burn them and do all this negative stuff, that we're doing it because of religion. We're doing it because of we are protecting our women. And this is God is making means that it's okay for us to do this because we're protecting the sanctity of our religion and our culture and our innocent and our women.
Native American characters appear as eroticized demons and ghosts in European American literature from the mid-17th century on. In the popular colonial and European American imagination, these Native American characters embodied the overt sexuality and natural desire that the Europeans lacked or repressed. These fantasies of Native people were, in essence, a critique of what was considered by majority culture to be normative sexual desire and behavior. This idea of non-white people possessing a natural or uninhibited sexuality, recalling, in a more positive way, how the early Spanish conquistadors saw Native people, is inherently racist. Nevertheless, by the mid-19th century, it had evolved to become foundational to how American culture was to conceptualize male-male relationships. Ideas about the natural and the civilized are often at the heart of how a culture classifies people, groups, and actions. Sexual activity between people of the same sex is often described as unnatural in religious and legal discourse. It is contrary to what nature or natural law intended. This is why sodomy statutes often refer to unnatural acts. European and colonial society considered itself civilized when contrasted with non-white peoples. Yet the othering of a behavior or identity as dangerous may, under certain ambiguous conditions, make it more desired. In this way, the unnatural became natural only when enacted by an already civilized white person. This is an example of purity and danger congealing around sexuality and gender. From Puritanism to Enlightenment thought. We now refer to the extraordinarily radical, political, cultural, and scientific ideas of the 18th century, collectively referred to, using a phrase coined in the mid-19th century, as the Enlightenment. In Europe, the Enlightenment drastically transformed intellectual life, majority consciousness, and social structures. Its effect on the colonies was profound, since it led directly to the American Revolution and the establishment of the Republic with the writing of the Declaration of Independence and the Virginia Declaration of Rights in 1776. At heart, the Enlightenment was a rejection of the age of faith, belief and acceptance of ideas and concepts without evidence. The Enlightenment grew out of the new scientific methods of thinkers such as Isaac Newton, who proved the existence of gravity in his 1684 on the motion of bodies in an orbit, and René Descartes, who in his 1637 Discourse on the Method helped invent rationalism, a philosophical system that prioritized logic to arrive at its conclusions. One of the most important claims of the Enlightenment was the insistence that every human being had equal worth, dignity, and personal integrity. However, many of the Enlightenment thinkers who formulated these radical ideas did not apply them to everyone, harboring prejudice against non-whites, Jews, and women even as they argued for equality. Some even constructed scientific evidence to rationally prove a biological inequality.
Eugenics.
Some colonialists embraced one of the most radical ideals of the Enlightenment, John Locke's concept of the separation of church and state. For millennia, religious and political structures had been inextricably bound together. The papacy forced kings and emperors to enact Catholic policy. Monarchies were predicated on the divine right of kings. Civil legal systems were based.
Okay, so I got to stop there because they're talking about the time of enlightenment because it started to, like science does, scientists do. They start to bring information that is undeniable. People can still deny it, but it's kind of similar to like flat earthers and round earthers. Like once we start to get scientists like, oh, I can actually prove that this is real. I can prove the earth is round. There are going to be some people still holding on to the flat earther theory. It's the flat earth. And it's going to be people who is like, what? There's a process in people accepting the idea of this science. Same thing with remember they used to kill women because they were like, it is the woman who controls the babies. Like are you going to give me an heir? Are you going to give me the son? Is your vagina going to create the heirs that I needed to create? And if you don't, sometimes people were getting killed because they weren't having boy babies. But science came along and proved that it's actually the sperm. Is the sperm going to give me an X or is the sperm going to give me a Y? And it's actually the dude who actually creates the baby. And then the recent information that people have brought out is actually the early part of the pregnancy is predicated on a lot of what the male sperm gives to the baby. Like how the placenta works, how like literally a lot of the stuff, the success of your pregnancy is based on the strength of the sperm that happens of the male. Like this is new science. This has been proved. So the early weeks of your pregnancy are really predicated on how strong and healthy the male sperm is for your baby to go to term. It's really, really, really important. So that's information y'all can go and do some research on. But that's even new. So, but if you remember before the science, they used to blame the woman. There was people who was getting their head chopped off and who was being outcast and because they weren't having male children because monarchy was the thing. And so now when we're in the new world, on Turtle Island, we're in this colony now. Now that this colony is forming, this country is being created. We do not want what was going on in Europe to be going on here. And so connecting everything to God and church and religion, we don't want that. We want everybody to have their own freedoms, but we know that there's some nuance. There needs to be some collective agreements too. You feel what I'm saying? Honey boom. Yeah. So I want to clock that. But also, this book is called, the book we're listening to is called The Queer History of the United States. But this book, this doesn't have an audiobook. This just is really fucking good. But it's called The Biopolitics of Feelings. One second. I've been on this right here. It's by Kyla Schumer. I'm about to send y'all the link. All right, it's called The Biopolitics of Feeling, Race, Sex, and Science in the 19th Century. I did some, when I buy books and I'm reading them, when it's some powerful shit that they get to talking, I like to, where is my there was a highlighted part that I wanted to. Okay. Okay, this book is so sickening. Like, it is so sickening. This is one of my favorite books of my life. Because it breaks down so much stuff. So one of the, because I anything that's kind of like, oh wow, I kind of highlight and be like, oh my God, I need to share this with somebody. And this particular thing, it was talking about Dr. Blackwell and Dr. Walker. So Dr. Blackwell and Dr. Walker, they are one of the first two of the first white women, to earn a doctrine in America. So to get the education, I remember it was a time when women getting education was illegal. Like they couldn't do it. They had to go have babies and be wives. That was the Puritan way. That was the way of the colonies, baby. And so once shit started to shift and they start to be able to get education, and there was, of course, there's going to be somebody that goes to that breaks the doors open to be doctors. And so one of them was Dr. Blackwell and Dr. Walker, but these was white women in that were being impacted by what we're talking about. Some of these eugenics mindsets and blah 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 blah. But one of the things that I highlighted, their work and their lives revealed how normative biopolitical operations of whiteness expanded the life options for white women. Feminism may be a liberation project for many, but it works within the biopolitics priorities to administer bodies according to distinct philosophical types that protect the normative sex bodies of whiteness, not rooting womanhood in the possession of a penetrable vagina, and condemns the body of everyone else. If you don't have a penetrative vagina, everything else condemned out of womanhood. So this goes into how some of their mindsets of as white women was rooted in these ideologies, even though they were doctors. So while they were coming up and trying to buck up against patriarchy, they were also doing things that was pressing down, just like today, pressing down Black people in general, especially Black women. There are women that love women, Mr. York, care for them. This chapter 3 called Vaginal Impressions, the gynoneurology and the racial origins of sex difference. There are women that love women, Mr. York. This is a quote. Care for them, grieve over them, worry about them, feel a fellow feeling, and a kind of duty on them, and never forget that they're one of them in the misery of all. I just love that quote, and I quoted it. But so listen to this. Describe a woman. Describe it. Walter explained that when men, because mind you, they're doctors, and so when you are a doctor or a academic, an intellectual, and you see some type of oppression, you're going to use your intellect to push people in your direction. And this is what they were doing. Even though they were white women, they were educated white women. So this is people who, now you got to understand patriarchy, they don't want to respect these women. Clock that. They don't want to respect them. They want them to be little ladies, pregnant, cooking dinner, taking care of home. This is the time that they lived in. And so these are women who are educated, trying to push men into the direction of in respecting women. This is before the right to vote. This is before any of that. So they're talking about marital rape. And so what Dr. Walker says, when men uses force to compel against the desires of women, a poison is sent forth from the walls of the vagina that injures his whole system and shortens his days. Now we know that's bullshit, right? But I'm gonna finish before I go into deeper. Impressions forcibly made during the violation of the mother later manifest in functions of the daughter's vagina. The daughter will have inherit such a power of vagina resistance that the grafts of its organs will change and result in pain for male partners, regardless of her own arousal and intent. The responsiveness and the malleability of the vagina nerves for Walker effectively records, decimates, and punishes men's proclivities for philandering and rape. So we know this is bullshit. This is bullshit science that she's trying to convey in her papers. And so in my notes, I said she's trying to solve the problem of rape, but using bullshit science. In the same way that men is using bullshit science against Black people, this doctor woman, this white woman, is trying to use bullshit science against white men raping her. Right? Not her particularly, but right. The problem is rape. I want you clock what she's saying. She's saying if you rape women, it's some poison that's going to come out of the vagina and ruin you. If you rape women, the children that come from her from this rape is going to ruin the little girls' vaginas that you're creating. So you're creating malformed vaginas by raping your wives. You don't want to be raping your wives because you're going to create these deformed vaginas in your wives from raping them. So don't do that. But clock, the problem is rape. I want to repeat that. What she's trying to do is solve the problem of rape. But she used it because she's a doctor and she's an academic. She's using bad science to solve that problem, to convince men that raping your wives is not okay. Because we know, based on patriarchal rule, based on patriarchies and the rules of marriage, raping your wife was not illegal for a very, very long time. You couldn't rape your wife because your wife was your property. In the same way that your slaves were your property, because your slaves were your property, you couldn't rape them. They were yours. They were, even when we think about beloved, when we think about, do you see that nuance in the law? When we think about beloved, what beloved, Toni Morrison's books, was based on was Margaret Garner's story. Margaret Garner was going to trial because she killed her children. That's what beloved is based on. She killed her children because she did not want them to go back to Sweet Home. She did not want them to go back to Sweet Home. But the nuance was, she was on trial. If we put her on trial for murder, then that would make her human. Do you see what I'm saying? It would make her, we have to charge her with destruction of property. Because if we charge her with murder, that means she killed a person and not destroyed property. Does it make sense? And that was the problem with the trial. If we say that these slaves are human and we saying that she murdered them, then we are acknowledging that they're human. But if we say that she destroyed the slave owner's property, then they're still property. And so the problem that we're coming up against is what they're trying, these nuance of laws is what they're trying to fix. And so I can't rape my wife if I own her. She's mine. She's not her own. So I'm not taking something from her. I am owed her body. The coverture laws, I cover her. That's why she can't go get a bank account, because I'm over her. I have to get a bank account in her name. That's why when I marry her, I get all of her property. I get all of her slaves. That's why men had to set up laws and rules in order, if they only had daughters, they had to set up laws and protections and rules to protect their daughters from philanthropy, womanizing men coming in and just marry them to get their property and their money and their wealth. They had to protect their own wealth. Men, it's not about protecting their daughters. It's about protecting their own wealth that they work for, that some man can't come in and marry their daughters and take their wealth. So they had to create laws to protect the women. Got it? And so what this woman is doing in this book, The Biopolitics of Feeling, is that she's using bad science to solve the problem of rape. Do you see what I'm saying? Even though this sounds ridiculous, when a man uses force against the desires of his wife, a poison is sent forth from the walls of her vagina to injure his whole system. Now we know that's not true, but they didn't have the science to know what was going on with the vagina at the time. So she's making it up. She's a woman in academia, so she's trying to figure out why this is. And there might be something that she thinks about that may be true that's happening, but this is not real. But she's saying this, and maybe not intentionally, but she's saying it because she wants to solve the problem of marital rape. So anyway, I wanted to share that because it was relevant to what this book was talking about.
Based largely on canon law. That is why sodomy, in Catholic and Protestant theology, a sin, was written into civil law. The First Amendment's religion clauses, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, marked a critical and significant turning point in how the United States would be governed.
Right. So remember, in this moment, in this era, they are trying to separate religion. They're trying to separate religion. The book that we're listening to is called The Queer History of the United States. I just brought another book in because it was relevant to them trying to make this separating in this moment, I'm talking about the separating of a religion. So when you say in the othering and the keeping a certain level of power and a certain level of status and what is right and wrong, most of this shit was rooted in religion. But they're a country that does not want religion to play a part. They want freedom of religion because of where they came from. They come from European, where religion and monarchy was the rule, and they didn't want to bring that over here. So understand the conflict of what they're trying to do. They're trying to bring the culture of religion into the laws, but without religion coming in and making the rules. So same thing that's happening right now today, that has been happening in this country. There is a clash between the idea of separating church and state, but still trying to live these laws and these religions and put these laws and religions on other people. So clock that, even though this is hundreds and hundreds of years ago, we're still having this same issue, that same ideology of separating church and state, but people trying to force their religion on other people's bodies.
Certainly, the thinking of colonialists such as Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Paine, Benjamin Franklin, and John Adams was enormously influenced by Enlightenment philosophers such as John Locke, Voltaire, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Almost all of the men who wrote the foundational documents of the new American political system were deists. They believed in a supreme being, but not necessarily in organized religion, and they rejected the belief that the scriptures were divinely inspired. They envisioned the laws of the United States to be, in true Enlightenment tradition, based on reason and equality. There was one aspect of continental thought that had no impact on how the founders viewed sexuality. By the mid-1780s, many European countries were enacting penal reform to recodify confusing and repetitive statutes and bring laws more in line with contemporary thinking. Sodomy laws were in direct conflict with principles of the Enlightenment that called for personal sexual autonomy. But despite a clearly articulated separation of church and state, the colonies never abolished their sodomy laws. This was not true in France, which abolished its sodomy law using Enlightenment precepts. In 1789, more than a decade after the American Declaration of Independence, the French National Assembly produced the Declaration of the Rights of Man, boldly stating that true civil liberty included the right to do anything that does not injure others. By 1791, this progressive thinking reached its logical conclusion when the Constituent Assembly abolished punishments for crimes created by superstition, feudalism, the tax system, and despotism. These included blasphemy, heresy, witchcraft, and sodomy, all crimes that were distinctly related to the persecuting society throughout European history. The only crimes connected with sex punished under the new French legal code were rape, child prostitution, and the selling of obscene pictures. This extraordinary legal reform had wide-ranging effects when, in 1810, it was incorporated into the Napoleonic Code. As a result, it was implemented in all French colonies and wherever Napoleon established governments in Europe and the Americas. In the context of the European Enlightenment, such a reform makes sense. Writers such as Denis Diderot, Jean-Paul Marat, Montesquieu, and Voltaire had written about the need to decriminalize personal sexual behavior, which they saw as an ethical decision, not a criminal one, even if they personally thought sodomy was wrong or unnatural. Voltaire's famous quip about his own forays into male-male sexual activity displays Enlightenment ambivalence. Once a scientist, twice a sodomite. Why did the American revolutionaries not follow France's example? Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson.
So, I had to go get me some popcorn. I wanted to talk about France a little bit. So, when I went to Paris, when I go to any place that I go, my interest is the history. So I'm going to go to the Black museums, Black History Museum, Black History in France. I'm going to go to, I'm going to always try to find some Black shit going on. And so I learned so much on this tour in Paris. by Ricky Thompson. I took a LGBT tour that was really centering white LGBT people, but it still was good history because there were certain little nuggets that he dropped that led me to other stuff. Same thing with the black one. And so the black one, while it was focused on black stuff, it was not focused on queer stuff. So while there was tons of black history and education that I got from the tour, it gave me nuggets that I need to go to search other stuff for queer stuff. Because, that's the way we live. Sometimes people are not looking for stuff that's going on with us at our intersections. And so it was interesting during the time that they're discussing, France was going through a revolution that was abolishing slavery. So the way people thought about slavery in France, they were against it. Not saying that racism didn't exist in France, because it does then and it does now. But it didn't get to warp into what America turned into. Because they was like, oh, this is whack. This is corny. And if you go to France, because of where France is at, it's right across the pond, the Mediterranean, to Africa. And so African people being in France isn't super abnormal. Anywhere in Europe isn't super abnormal. They're right there. But in the same way that if you go there, our culture, like say in our culture, you know how you come to somebody's house, you can see the decor and it'd be like, oh, this is kind of like Asian decor. Or anything that Americans fetishize about other people's culture, you can kind of see it in their house. Asian style doors or French doors, or they kind of fetishizes other cultures shit, like French and European and particularly Europe stuff. You know what I'm talking about? Like so even like with clothes and fashion, like they kind of fetishize European shit. But if you go over there, they kind of fetishizes African shit. So like I stayed in one of the richest areas of France in the 7th district. And we rented this Airbnb, and everything in this house looked African. Like it was like, what is going on with do black people own this? Like in my brain, if I came into this house in America, I would have known that black people lived here, because it's a certain level of Africanness. And I'm like, oh, why is this like this? Does black people own this? They did not. But what I didn't understand is sometimes a lot of people in France fetishizes African shit. So you'll see like zebra prints, you'll see like and even hold on. Cast iron gates in New Orleans. So like this shit right here, like when you go to New Orleans and you see this type of stuff, because it's French, like this is the French accents of New Orleans. So you know that tons of French people kind of took over New Orleans. You know the history of New Orleans and France and Spain, blah, 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 blah. This cast iron stuff, you see how this is all kind of like little cute little designs in the cast iron? These little swirls right here, like that right there. So we consider that shit French, but it's actually African. So look at this. That is an African symbol. So this is African West African symbol. And so when we look at the cast iron that we see, look, that we see in those French things, those are African symbols that we are seeing. The architect that they hired to be able to create those things in France was African. And it just repeats all over the country. And so when we see that over here in New Orleans, we're calling it French, but it's African. And it's in all those symbols. African symbols are in the cast iron. And it's all over France. Anyway, that I say that because it's not to imply that racism doesn't exist at all in France, but they just had a heads up because they was ready to abolish really, really early on. Ready to abolish slavery. And so Thomas Jefferson, when he took Sally Hemings over there with his daughter, because Sally Hemings, Thomas Jefferson's daughter, her older slave caretaker died. And so when they were going over to be diplomats in France, John Adams was the president at the time. Abigail Adams, they all was over in France. And if you go over to France, they got statues of Thomas Jefferson over there because he was a diplomat at the time. When his daughter's black slave caretaker died, he let Sally Hemings, who was owned by his wife, because her father, Thomas Jefferson's wife's father, got it legally binding that he would not inherit, he can't take her shit, her slaves, which was Sally Hemings, until she died. He made Sally Hemings his daughter caretaker, even though she was too young, traditionally too young to be her caretaker. But, they be making up rules. So by the time they get over to France, he already sleeping with her because she's a slave. He already sleeping with her. But she also come to France, and France got free black people. So it's like, and the black people were telling her, girl, you ain't got to go back over there, girl. You can stay over here in France with us, girl. Fuck them. But and she could have hit it. But she didn't. She made a pact and said, yo, you let my kids be free. Once they hit 21, and I'll come back to America with you. Making it work. And Thomas Jefferson freed all of her children when they hit 21 and gave them property in Monticello. That's why we are hearing about his children and grandchildren. It's because they were getting land outside of Monticello. And everybody knew that was their kids. So anyway, let's go.
Attended dinner parties in Paris with some of these philosophers. The notion of sexual autonomy even re-articulated, for Enlightenment thinkers, the Puritan concept of individuality and care of the self and body. Yet not only did the 13 original colonies keep their sodomy laws, they maintained, elaborated on, and enforced them for the next 212 years. Was it that the United States, composed of colonies rooted in many conflicting religious and civil polities, would be unable to agree on a non-ambivalent way to conceptualize sexual behavior? Or was it that a country premised on descent from England had to continue to assert its identity as such? A crucial response to this question, which is central to thinking about lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender people, is that during the Revolutionary Era, American culture was undergoing significant and complicated transformations regarding gender. Gender was understood by the majority of Americans as a stable system that had its roots in Genesis chapter 5, verse 2. Male and female created he them, and blessed them, and called their name Adam. Gender is a primary organizational focus in any culture. In the newly formed United States, predicated on revolutionary ideas, yet deeply flawed in the execution of them, concepts of gender would undergo major changes that evidenced this ambivalence. The presentation of a firm, masculine authority as the face of the new American citizen exposed the tension of wanting to be free and needing to assert control. Inventing the American man. One of the most important changes of the Revolutionary Era was the invention of a new form of American masculinity. As the colonies claimed their political independence from Great Britain, it was clear they would have to establish a new, distinct culture that would reflect their own political ideology. One of the ways they did this was to consciously invent a new American man who represented all of the new virtues of the Republic and had little connection to the traditional Englishman. This new American man was bold, rugged, aggressive, unafraid of fighting, and comfortable asserting himself. This model was in complete contrast to the Englishman, who was stereotyped as refined, overly polite, ineffectual, and often effeminate. The new American man was personified in popular myth-making by rural colonists such as Ethan Allen, who fought the British in Vermont and New York State, and John Paul Jones.
Oh wait, I gotta pause there to give more context too. So remember that there is an American, not right now, but prior to this, there was an American Revolution that was severing ties, didn't really sever them, but from Great Britain, from European powers. There was a separation and they were becoming their own thing, America. Cutting off the people from the ponds because, they were trying to get their money and taxing them. And that's why the Tea Party and Boston Tea Party, they was throwing over teas and burning fucking ships. And, America was like, fuck y'all. We don't want to fuck with y'all no more. We want to create our own thing and do our own thing. So, clock the tea that now we have this power and this power growing. They have to put out propaganda and an image of themselves that clashes with these people, these fucking rebel, degenerate, new world motherfuckers. So we're going to give the image that we are classy. We're classy masculinity. We're refined. And we see it today. You see how and it affects how we look at British people today. But they're going to give the propaganda that we Europeans are more refined in our food. We are more, y'all do all that, y'all got all this slave cooking and the slaves are impacting how y'all do y'all food, blah, 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 blah. But we are more refined. We are more high class. There's a propaganda machine that is anti-American. That's still going on to this day. But the voice and how they talk and things that they do, their culture is seen as high class. And America is seen as rugged and blah, 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 and unrefined. And so a lot of times, rich people, upper class people, would be mimicking their homes around upper class Englishmen. So understand that during this time, there is a clash happening between Europe and American culture that is belittling America. that's saying that they are less than. And so that's what they're talking about here too, that there's a certain type of masculinity that was becoming more popular, that was a little bit more rugged, not scared to fight and blah 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 blah, because we just beat y'all ass in this revolution. So we thugs out here. Fuck y'all. You feel what I'm saying? So they're less refined. They're being affected by the Native Americans. They got the slaves over there that's impacting their culture. Do you see what I'm saying? All of these things is making America look less refined. And this is reflected in how we think about them now. When we hear their voice, we think of them as soft and pussies. Imagine some dude coming up trying to rob you. He's giving you a British accent. You're like, nigga, get out of here. Because our minds think about British things as weak, soft, meek, more refined. So understand that what's happening in this chapter, they're talking about that masculinity, that image of masculinity starting to be created. And also when we get into the Teddy Roosevelt time, that also changes into, because they are that he changes the masculinity too, because they still, while they may be image of ruggedness, there still was a class of upper class that was a different way of doing things too. We had the top hats and during the golden ages. Anyway, masculinity started to shift.
The Scottish-born naval mastermind who famously said in battle, "I have not yet begun to fight." This new action-oriented American man already existed in some form, due to the conditions of survival on the frontier. The revolution was well fought by the colonists because they were an armed society, and just about every white man had a gun and could shoot. The new American man, a mythic prototype defined by his heroic actions in the colonial militia, was also a prototype of the citizen. Not only were slaves unable to join a militia, but so were friendly Native Americans, free Africans, white servants, and white men without homes. These restrictions ensured that the prototypical American man was of a certain class, ethnicity, property, and citizenship status. A prime example of this fabrication of American manhood is Royal Tyler's 1787, The Contrast, the first American written play produced in the United States. A traditional comedy of manners, the play pitted the foolish, duplicitous, American-born, but British-identified Mr. Billy Dimple, a flippant, pallid, polite beau who devotes the morning to his toilet and then minces out, against the play's hero, the very American Colonel Manley, who is all that his name...
Colonel Manley. Now, Clock, remember I told y'all in the beginning of this live chat how our Black feminist icons really be putting it down and letting us know what should be going on. Toni Morrison said that at the first frontier of these changes happened in the art, and he is discussing how the first play created by an American that became popular is establishing these ideas of manhood. Colonel Manley, who was an American colonel, that is teaching this British-born man here in America to be more manly. And so these ideologies, usually the first frontier that they are battling or selling it to you is in the art. So when people act like it's just music or that it's just books, it's just TV, no, the artists are at the forefront in indoctrinating you into a thought, or even bringing it up in your mind for you to make decisions about it. Whether you go to or from it, is still the idea that they're selling you. So pay attention to what you are listening to and what you are, how you are analyzing the art that you are consuming, because there is a reason why that artist created that movie, created that music, created that. So pay attention to those things. I remember recently, yeah, we know Demi Moore. Demi Moore recently just won a Golden Globe, and her acceptance speech, she said, "This is the first thing that I ever the time that I ever got acknowledged by an award. She's never won anything." And she was like, somebody said that she was a popcorn artist. said that she was a popcorn artist. No. And so I'm trying to find this movie. 1984. Yes, was it called? Okay. So yeah, so there was a movie that definitely couldn't have got made today in 1984 called Blame It on Rio. And it is Demi Moore. It was one of her earliest movies. And it is about two older men that take both of their daughters on vacation. So two younger women and an older man, and two older men that are friends, and they take both of their young daughters on vacation to Rio with them. And they say blame it on Rio. But basically what the movie is about is one of the young girls is infatuated with one of the older men. With the other, not their father, but their father's friend. And it's just navigating that relationship. This movie is a fucking old creepy man's fantasy about women, of objectifying women, and then the fantasy of this young girl being infatuated with this older man. And I bring that up as an example is because in this time, think of early 80s, early 90s, we had these moments of where men were trying to demonize women as these as they were the real world. A lot of women were being exploited, young women being molested and getting quaaludes put on them, and there was shit happening with women. This early 80s, probably started writing this in the 70s. Shit was happening with women, and so men were creating art that was making women seem like they were the ones, the Lolitas of the world, that these young girls are chasing after these older men. Do you see what I'm saying? You clocking it? And so because of what was the real culture in the real world of what was happening, the artists, the filmmakers, the writers, the people who were creating these things were creating images to combat the problem that was happening. Oh, we're going to make these young girls seem like they are chasing after us, even though in the real world, this is not what's happening. And so he creates this movie called Blame It on Rio, which is this fucking creepy man's fantasy. It wouldn't be made today, but at the time in 84, boom. So I wanted to kind of give that as an example that I recently learned about, and Demi wasn't talking about it, but because she is in the forefront of my mind, I thought about that movie, and so I'm sharing it with y'all. It's called Blame It on Rio. It has the amazing actor Michael Caine in it, and something interesting to watch. But it really is just an old man's creepy fantasy about how it uses propaganda to demonize young women as if they're fetishizing old men.
The contrast is insistently didactic and aimed at creating a new American citizen-based culture.
They talk about the play.
The play's prologue states its political purpose. Exult, each patriot heart. This night is shown, a peace which we may fairly call our own. With the proud titles of, My Lord, Your Grace, to humble Mr. and plain Sir give place. At the play's end, as he is called a coward for refusing to fight with Dimple, Manley explains, Yes, sir. This sword was presented to me by that brave Gaelic hero, the Marquis de Lafayette. I have drawn it in the service of my country and in private life, on the only occasion where a man is justified in drawing his sword in defense of a lady's honor. I have fought too many battles in the service of my country to dread the imputation of cowardice. Death from a man of honor would be a glory you do not merit. You shall live to bear the insult of man and the contempt of that sex whose general smiles afforded you all your happiness. In one grand speech, Tyler connects the colonial revolution to American manhood, national pride, personal honor, and different sex desire. This is, in part, why the United States did not abolish its sodomy laws. Highly gendered societies reinforce traditional ideas about gender through regulating sexual behavior. In the fervor of those revolutionary years and the promotion of a national masculinity, The idea that sodomy laws might be abolished might have been understood, even by Enlightenment men, as counterproductive. But the creation of a prototype American man presented a host of broader questions and problems. If there was a new American man, did there also have to be a new American woman? Would she be as bold and adventurous as her male counterpart? There is no question that colonial and Revolution-era women worked hard and exhibited enormous physical and psychological strengths. They often ran homes and businesses when men were off fighting. Life was filled with everyday hardships as the country grew and the Revolutionary War continued for 8 years. Yet in the traditional Puritan equation of different sex relationships in a family, a man's strength was defined, enhanced, and complemented by a compliant woman. At this point, the myth of the new American man and the nation's new gender roles become less coherent. Like all strictly delineated systems of gender, the new American models could not represent the diverse lives of actual people. The evolving American culture was filled with enormous anxiety over the meaning of gender roles. First, many of the men who conceptualized this new country were not good examples of the new American man. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, John Adams, and Alexander Hamilton, with their fine manners, powdered wigs, large estates, and voluminous libraries, were far closer to the image of the wealthy, aristocratic, educated Englishman from which the country was distancing itself. Second, the women in this circle were also well educated and frequently spoke their minds, contrary to the subordinate role women were thought to hold in society. During the 1776 Continental Congress, Adams and his wife Abigail wrote one another frequently, and she was direct in her concerns. I long to hear that you have declared an independency. And by the way, in the new code of laws which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation. That your sex are naturally tyrannical is a truth so thoroughly established as to admit of no dispute. But such of you as wish to be happy willingly give up the harsh title of master for the more tender and endearing one of friend. John Adams dismisses her concerns with a joke. We dare not exert our power in its full latitude. We are obliged to go fair and softly, and, in practice, you know we are the subjects. We have only the name of masters, and rather than give up this, which would completely subject us to the despotism of the petticoat. But it is clear that the new American nation and the new American man valued free white men above women and all other men. Abigail Adams was not the only woman with these ideas. Over the next decade, women lobbied for suffrage, only to be consistently denied the right to have a voice in their government.
Wait. Okay, I gotta clock this. Okay, so he's using Abigail Adams as an example of how her being an educated upper class woman is pushing against her husband to say, hey, we need power and respect too. As a white woman, I hope y'all not playing these silly games. Okay? Y'all know the proverb, the African proverb, what is it? About the lion. Hold on, I'm about to look it up. The African proverb about the lion and the hunter. Okay, I'm about to read it. So the proverb is this. Until the lion tells a story, the hunter will always be the hero. Okay? Absolutely, Jenny. So here, listen to that proverb. I want you to hear me when I repeat it. Until the lion tells a story, the hunter will always be the hero. So I say that because a lot of the context when we talk about these movement changes and the births of these ideologies and the birth of these movements, a lot of times the examples that are going to be used is going to be white people examples or upper class people in power. because they are deemed as the important ones. So when we look at their diaries and we look at their writings and we examine their lives, when we think about this era of time, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson, these are going to be the people that we have examined. We have looked at we had investment in, because we're invested in documenting the history of this early part of America, and white people were in power. They were the hunter. They're going to be the hero. Anybody who is not on the pedestal or in power, they're going to be the periphery, or in the peripheral. They're not going to be the center. So we're going to hear these stories about Abigail Adams bucking up against her husband. So it can give us the impression that white women started feminism when they did not. These feminist ideals, because they are in power, they're going to give you the impression that white women were the ones who was trying to get suffrage. Da, 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 da. But what you also have to understand, because they weren't centered in the conversation, Black people were also trying to come out of slavery, trying to, in these nuanced situations where they are figuring out that, oh, I might have a little bit of power in this situation, and I'm trying to navigate these systems in ways that benefit me. And so there's going to be, and because you sitting up on your high horse, you're not going to understand these things. I'm a woman working in the factory or working in the field, and I'm getting either sold for more or sold for less. My children getting sold for more, sold for less, because one is a girl, one is a boy. However that works out, because of what's happening in the world, I am more adept as a Black woman to be able to be in these situations where there is some unfair shit going on. But because you're not understanding or exploring my narrative, you think that these white bitches came up with it. Because you're not telling the story about me, because you're the hunter and I'm the lion, you're going to be the hero. When I start working in the factories, when white women wasn't working at all, when it wasn't feminine to be working in a factory, but because because my men couldn't make enough money to take care of me yet, I had to help them by being maids and washerwomen and seamstress and da 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 da. I had to work, but then I'm in these factories working with these men, and they getting paid more than me just because I'm a woman, even though we're doing the same dangerous jobs in these factories. And so, in my mind, I think this is unfair. I think we should be treated equally and paid equally. That is a feminist thought. Before white women even got to working at all, feeling that as a woman I should be treated better, treated equally. That is a feminist thought. When Sojourner Truth, even though it's questionable whether she said it or not, when Sojourner Truth said, "Ain't I a woman?" that is a feminist thought, because she was saying that in response to people treating women with care. She said, the men ain't never put their coat down over a puddle for me to get into a cart. And y'all saying that that's what y'all supposed to do to women, right? Ain't I a woman? That's the whole point of what she's saying. That is a feminist ideal, that I should be treated equally. I should be treated fairly, but you're not considering me even a woman compared to them. I should be treated equally because I'm a woman, right? But I'm not being treated equally. That is at the intersection. That is how I'm being treated differently at the intersection of my gender and my race. So even though you want to pamper and take care of white women and not pamper and take care of Black men, I'm not getting either one of the perks of any one of them. I'm not getting no race perks. I'm not getting no gender perks. I'm at the intersections of being a girl, being a woman, a female, and Black. African, however you want to do it. And so these ideas didn't just come out of the minds of white women. Oh my God. Like white women that what? It's petty, but what have white women come up with? What have they come up with? You think stop. Listen. Stop playing in our face. We so slow. We so slow that we couldn't come up with that this is unfair to women. We couldn't come up with the idea that we want to vote. We have more at stake as Black women. We have more at stake than them. They could just sit on their laurels and be taken care of by white men. We didn't have that luxury because our men were being oppressed. So you think we didn't come up with an idea? Ooh, I wish we had equal rights as men and women. You didn't think that that comes up in their mind? You think white women said, oh, we should have equal rights. And Black women was like, oh, gee, oh my God, the white women are on to something. The fuck out of here. Get out of here. That is stupid. That is dumb. All right. So I wanted to talk about that. But yes, until the lion tells the story, the hunter will always be the hero. White women didn't start feminism. And any of the first wave and second wave feminists that we think about, there is a Black woman in comparison that was silenced. When we think about, we're going to read the book. We're going to do a chapter in the book called The Problem with White Women, a counter-feminist narrative, where she literally in every chapter of her book, she compares first wave or second wave. She goes by wave. So the first wave feminists, the center one, like Harriet Beecher Stowe, she was one, but we ignore that there was a Frances Harper, a Black woman feminist. We ignore her because white women was at the center of the power and the class structure. They were at the top. So we wasn't caring about what Black women were saying and what they were going through. When we get into even second wave, third wave feminism, with I think it was third wave. Is it third? Is Betty Friedan considered third wave? Anyway, first wave, second, whatever wave, Betty Friedan, because she was educated, middle class, white woman, feminine mystique blew up. Oh, she knows exactly what we're talking about. We're educated with degrees, and they want us to stay home and cook and clean and be leave it to beaver. And she knows exactly what we're talking about. Black women been worried about that shit. They been working. Y'all hoes ain't been working. Y'all been in the house. We actually been y'all maids. And who was helping her write the feminine mystique? Who was helping her write that and drafted and edited it? You want to know who? Trans icon Polly Murray, who was helping Betty Friedan edit and write and type out her manuscript. A Black trans person. Know your history. So this white woman got the credit, even though she was brainstorming with a Black woman who had experienced all the shit, the nuanced. These white women did not create feminism. That wasn't some brainchild of theirs that Black women just latched on to. Ooh, fuck you. If you think that it was, it's because you don't know our history and you don't care.
Some states allowed female suffrage for a short while. This quickly changed. Women were denied suffrage in New York in 1777, in Massachusetts in 1780, and in New Hampshire in 1784. In 1787, a constitutional convention allowed the states to decide on suffrage. All states but New Jersey denied women the right to vote.
Come on, New Jersey, giving the women the right to vote early, baby.
Jersey revoked female suffrage,
but they revoked
in
it
1807.
In 1807.
In 1867, the 14th Amendment stipulated specifically that suffrage is the right of male citizens alone.
So 14th Amendment.
Just friends.
All right, so that's the part about suffrage. So you see that how this gender stuff is tipping in. We see that there was this male identity that was being created, and in a certain level of focus on individualism, and the individual, you are the king of your own castle, not these people are the king. This monarchy is the king. You are the king of your own castle. And to be godly, these coverture laws, it's supposed to be you as the head of your household, with your house as your kingdom, your wife, and she's supposed to take care of the home and your children. And that is your legacy. So this starts to be this Puritan idea. This starts to be the standard. That individualism, that standard, like this is your house, you control it. And our laws are supposed to protect you, and you supposed to have your guns. So that's why the Second Amendment and all these things was important, because you were supposed to be able to protect your kingdom, protect your home, protect your wife, protect your children, because this is like your little kingdom. And that was the emphasis. And it's not about religion, it's about, even though that was the subtext, it's not about religion. It's about not mimicking that we are under the rule of a monarchy. We rule our own kingdom, which is our home. And that's what manly. So if this is what manly is for a man, this is the ideals of a man, what's the ideals of a woman? So it's gonna be taking care of home, mother, nurturing, soft, skinny, feminine, motherly. And so anybody who don't fit that idea, there's going to be some pushback. So, okay. So now the next, this is the same chapter, but this is another part of the chapter. It's called Just Friends. And they talking about the relationship between men and women, same sex men and women, and how a lot of this shit was real spicy, but we couldn't say it was gay. We couldn't say people was trans. We couldn't say how this stuff was going on, but it's looking real gay and real trans.
In societies in which gender and power are inexplicably intertwined, often little respect.
Thumbs up if you're watching.
Who desire their own sex or who do not conform to accepted gender. New Jersey revoked female suffrage.
Thumbs up if you're listening.
In 1867,
Yay.
The 14th Amendment stipulated specifically that suffrage is the right of male citizens alone.
Hold on.
Just friends. In societies in which gender and power are inexplicably intertwined, often little respect is given to people who desire their own sex or who do not conform to accepted gender expectations. Same-sex relationships and desires, however, manifest themselves in various, often more socially acceptable ways. This is especially true in the complicated interplay between companionship, community, and eroticism in people's lives. The clearly defined separate social spheres for women and men, both the public and the private for men, and most often the domestic for women, give rise to clearly defined same-sex cultures, usually referred to as homosocial. This term does not necessarily imply an erotic or sexual component, although those could and often do exist, but rather describes a social construct that emerged in specific ways during the 18th century. Homosocial space at this time gave birth to distinct same-sex relationships that were referred to in popular and literary culture as romantic or intimate friendships. These friendships were important to the women and men who engaged in them, often as important and long-lasting as traditional heterosexual marriages, and were an accepted, praised, and significant social institution. Alan Bray argues that these friendships were largely a product of the Enlightenment, that the ideas of egalitarianism, brotherhood, and rational love, as opposed to uncontrolled, passionate love, helped contribute to a new concept of deeply committed, emotionally passionate friendship between members of the same sex. It is possible that some of these friendships embodied similarities to our contemporary ideas of romantic and sexual relationships. In many ways, they were understood as a beneficial and complementary alternative to marriage. A major function of heterosexual marriage was to regulate sexual activity that would lead to reproduction, but this new idea of friendship, for men as well as women, often provided a more enlightening, expressive outlet.
Okay. So they're talking about these homosocial spaces. I know, like if you watch any movie, like any movie or any show that is set in these times, a lot of the spaces were very gender based, and it was not cool for you as a particular gender to be in certain spaces. So, for example, one of the reasons why white women got to kind of skirt around and not be deemed as the horrible people that they were during the slave trade is because a lot of the ledgers at the slave markets, they were seen as the woman of the house, the mistress of the house. And most of the things that was depicted was like white men whipping slaves, and the horrific practices were of the men. And it's not saying that they weren't, but when you look at the ledgers from the slave market, slave trades, and at the auctions, women couldn't be there. And so the people who were on the ledgers were men. Okay. So when you go to the slave auction and they own the block and it's like, oh, we got a nice breeding mare here and da 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 da, going once, going twice, da 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 da. When it was the slave auction, women couldn't be there. But don't let that fool you. Women owned slaves. There were women who owned slaves alone without their husbands that they inherited from their fathers or that they bought themselves. But they couldn't be there. So guess who they had there? They had their brothers. They had their like their overseers, their gardeners, whoever was their male kind of like caretaker. Not caretaker isn't taking care of them, but taking care of their grounds that they owned. If they owned property, the dude could go sell for them at the auction. Their gardeners, their overseers, there's somebody, some dude, whoever, whatever male, they would send them. So his name would be on the ledger. But she's the one who owns the slave. So there's an image that they're hiding behind when it comes to men. They are put on the pedestal as this beautiful, chaste woman in the corsets and the petticoats and the da 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 da. While the white men are seen as the slave masters and doing these negative things. Not saying that they were not, but it gives the image that they weren't doing nothing. They just was a slave to the system, and we didn't have power back then. Yes, you did. There was moments when you did have power. Got it? There was moments when they did have power. And that's what the book called We Were Her Property Too. We were her property. That's what that book explains. And so there is this there was these spaces that were only for men, and you weren't even as a woman supposed to be in those spaces. It wasn't couth. It didn't make you look good. You weren't that's why you, even when you see in the homes that they created, there was a parlor for men to be in and sit around and drink their cigars and their whiskeys and their bourbons and talking about the politics of the day. You as a woman are not even supposed to be in there. And so there was these homosocial spaces. But also, there is a religious context that was happening too when it comes to the purity and sanctity of marriage and how sex was supposed, what sex was about. The ideology that sex is just meant for procreation, not fun. Us just having sex with our wives and husbands just to be fucking, that is actually a new age concept. That wasn't the norm. Having sex just for fun was sinful, even with your wife. You supposed to be in your husband. You supposed to have sex for procreation. That was an ideology. Okay? So I want y'all to clock that, because this is not how we think about sex in marriage now. We think about sex as marriages. This is what we, once you get married, we can do what we want. We're having sex and we have a fun. This is what we do with each other. It strengthens the love and the bonds of husband and wife. That's not how they thought about it back in the day. There was a clash in ideologies around sex and marriage. And one of those clashes is, should we have sex for fun or procreation? And sex was meant to be done for procreation to many people. It wasn't meant to be having sex just to be having sex. I'm not saying that everybody was going along with that, because there were some people that was against that wanted it to be fun. And once we get married, we do what we do. But I want y'all to clock that. And so because of this clash and these ideologies, there was a lot of things that were happening to buck up against that ideology. So for example, if marriage was supposed, if the sex within a marriage is supposed to be just for procreation, a woman, and remember, this is about marital rape, and if a woman don't want to have sex for fun, what men gonna do? Rape them. And so this is why this was an issue, because to her, she has been sold that marriage is supposed to be for this. It ain't just supposed to be for pleasure. It's supposed to be for this. So no, if I don't want to have sex, I don't want to have sex. And then niggas is gonna be taking it because I'm married to you. You're supposed to give it to me. Clock how this is going on. But say that you are not an evil man, okay? Say that you're not an evil man and you don't want to rape your wife. You think that that's barbaric and late. What do you do if you get horny? You rape your slaves. What else do you do if you get horny? Clock homosocial activities. Fuck with your homeboy. Clock that. If you gay, clock it. I want y'all to clock this T. We know how DL niggas and undercover sex stuff happens in our world now. That shit was not happening back then. It was just happening into the context of the rules of society at the time. So the context is the religious folks, to be classy, is saying that your woman is your chaste, pure wife. You're not supposed to defile her with them nasty ideas that you got around the booty hole, with them nasty ideas about oral sex, with these nasty ideas that you got around sex. It is a sacred act for you to create a baby. All that other nasty stuff, you're not supposed to do it with your wife. That is not classy. That's not holy. That is not religious. So what they're going to do is transfer all that nasty sexual shit to something else, whether it be the slaves or, if they homosexual, same sex. In these homosocial activities that bred this, that bred these ideologies, that bred these actions, these behaviors. And so they're going to start reading letters in these friendships of popular people that we know. Clock that.
We can easily find evidence of romantic friendships in the lives of both famous and common people. Feminist historians have uncovered extensive, complex networks of female friendships in the 18th and 19th centuries and examined what they meant, not only to the individual women, but to the society in which they lived. Personal allegiance could be political allegiance, but not necessarily national allegiance. Women involved in these friendships understood the social significance and resonance, which sometimes challenged social norms, of their deep and intense connections. Sarah M. Grimke, the abolitionist and feminist, signed her letters to her beloved Mary Parker, "Thine in the bonds of womanhood." Grimke, understanding the implications of bonds in slavery, used the phrase to signify the deep connection between herself and Parker and how they were bound together as women, as well as oppressed together as women. The writer's language also situates them in the realm of the erotic. In the first decade of the 19th century, Eunice Callender of Boston wrote to her cousin and intimate friend, Sarah Ripley, whose letters she wrote, "Breathe forth the sentiments of my soul. Oh, could you see with what rapture all your epistles are opened by me? Then would you acknowledge that my friendship at least equals your own, and yours, I believe, is as true as pure a flame as ever warmed the breast of any human creature." This language was common within male romantic friendships as well. Daniel Webster wrote to James Hervey Bingham in an 1804 letter, "Yes, James, I must come. We will yoke together again. Your little bed is just wide enough. We will practice at the same bar and be as friendly a pair of single fellows as ever cracked a nut." Such intensity and devotion were emblematic of how these relationships reflected the newly professed equality and fraternity of society and the nation. The Marquis de Lafayette wrote affectionately to George Washington on
George
June 12,
Washington.
1799, during the height of the Revolution. "My dear General, there never was a friend, my dear General, so much, so tenderly beloved, as I love and respect you. Happy in our union, in the pleasure of living near to you, in the pleasing satisfaction of partaking every sentiment of your heart, every event of your life, I have taken such a habit of being inseparable from you, that I cannot now accustom myself to your absence, and I am more and more afflicted at that enormous distance which keeps me so far from my dearest friend." Because of their intensity, intimate friendships could be as complicated as any sexual relationship, and not always smooth, as we see in this letter from Lafayette to Washington, written a few months after the previous one. "My dear General, from those happy ties of friendship by which you were pleased to unite yourself with me, from the promises you so tenderly made me when we parted at Fishkill, gave me such expectations of hearing often from you, that complaints ought to be permitted to my affectionate heart."
George Washington ghosted his ass. He is like, nigga, you came and banged this box out and told me that you was gonna write me, and you ain't even motherfucking writing me. Well, if you wouldn't have did that, motherfucker, I wouldn't have thought that I wouldn't have expected you to write me. So why is you not writing me? That's what this letter is giving. Clock that T.
"Not a line from you, my dear General, has yet arrived into my hands, and though several ships from America, several despatches from Congress or the French minister are safely brought to France, my ardent hopes of getting at length a letter from General Washington have ever been unhappily disappointed. I cannot in any way account for that bad luck, and when I remember that in those little separations where I was but some days from you, the most friendly letters, the most minute account of your circumstances were kindly written to me, I am convinced you have not neglected and almost forgotten me for so long a time. I have therefore to complain of fortune, of some mistake or neglect in acquainting you that there was an opportunity of anything. Indeed, but what could injure the sense I have of your affection for me? Let me beseech you, my dear General, by that mutual, tender, and experienced friendship in which I have put an immense portion of my happiness, to be very exact in inquiring for occasions, and never to miss those which may convey to me letters that I shall be so much pleased to receive."
Baby, he missed that dick, baby.
Second letter to
That dick was powerful. Baby, that's a motherfucker pouring their heart out. Dick times, baby. Why is you not writing me? General. Last time I laid in your little bed, honey, you put it on me. And I don't understand. What did I do?
And a communication from a hurt, angry lover.
Her angry lover.
Evidence that George Washington and the Marquis de Lafayette were sexually involved as lovers, nor, as historian Charlie Shively points out, do we have any evidence that they were not. But what we do know is that they had an intensely emotional, companionate friendship with erotic overtones.
We know the T
can only be understood in the context of a national fight for freedom from political oppression and the ideals of the Enlightenment.
Wasn't nobody writing no motherfucker like that.
In public,
that they wouldn't fucking.
Culture in which they thrived. As public relationships, they influenced and were influenced by the political culture of the time. Revolutionary gender. In 1778, an anonymous contributor to the Worcester Spy wrote that the newly formed American people had broken the line that divided the sexes. At the end of the 18th century, three very different people, two real and one fictional, all of them born women, captured the public imagination, breaking that divide.
queer,
The first
trans.
was Jemima Wilkinson, a charismatic evangelist who was born a Quaker in 1752.
Jemima Wilkerson.
In 1775, during a series of debilitating illnesses and fevers, she believed that Christ entered her body and that she was now neither female nor male, but was commanded to bring her ministry to the new country. She renamed herself Public Universal Friend, refused to use the pronouns she or he, and dressed in gender-neutral clerical garments that made her sex unreadable.
Been here, baby. Been shaking it up. Been worried about pronouns. Been doing this, honey. We been out here.
Contemporary accounts state that many in her audience saw her as male. Wilkinson's gender presentation, as well as her theological message, she preached complete sexual abstinence, strict adherence to a narrowly defined interpretation of the Ten Commandments, unqualified universal friendship, and the apocalyptic vision of the harshest Hebrew Bible prophets, made her a sensation throughout Rhode Island, Pennsylvania, and Massachusetts. In the mid-1780s, the popular press and pamphlet culture covered her sermons in detail and placed particular emphasis on her sexually ambiguous persona. She had a huge following that verged on a cult and eventually started her own religious settlement in central New York State. Deborah Sampson Gannett's public career was as noted as Wilkinson's. She was born in 1760 outside Plymouth, Massachusetts. In May 1782, dressed as a man, she enrolled in the Continental Army under the name Robert Shirtliff. She fought in several battles until she was discovered, after being wounded, in 1783, to be a woman. She received an honorable discharge, and in 1785, married Robert Gannett. In a few years' time, they had 3 children. Sampson Gannett was relatively unknown until 1797 when, in conjunction with the writer Herman Mann, she published a semi-fictional narrative of her time as a cross-dressed revolutionary soldier. It was titled The Female Review, or Memoirs of an American Young Lady whose life and character are peculiarly distinguished, being a Continental soldier for nearly 3 years in the late American War. The work was a straightforward tale that touched on the author's possible homosexuality through descriptions of titillating, affectionate interactions with women. Sampson Gannett's intention in publishing the narrative was to gain public attention for her attempt to be awarded a military pension. In 1802, Sampson Gannett commenced a series of public lectures about her life. She spent much of her time on stage, after stating that she could not explain why she chose to cross-dress and join the Continental Army, extolling traditional gender roles for women. Near the end of the presentation, she left the stage, returned dressed in her army uniform, and executed complicated and physically taxing military drills. Her presentation was extremely popular in Boston, and she repeated it in other New England cities.
Clock, I said. Art. What is she doing? She doing a one person, woman at the time, but one person stage play. And the point of her doing this, she has an agenda. The point of her sharing her story, the point of her doing this is to prove that women can do what y'all do. That's why I'm telling you what happened to me when I was in the army as a cross-dressed revolutionary. But I'm also at the end of this artful expression. Yes, at this end of this artful expression, I'm going to do what we used to do in the army and show you that I could do this shit, because I'm trying to convince you that women don't have to be what y'all think that they are. There's an agenda in that.
In 1816, after years of petitioning and with help from Paul Revere, Sampson Gannett was finally awarded
200 years ago.
She deserved by both the state of Massachusetts and
her agenda was to get her pension. Clock that. It wasn't just to shift the culture's narrative, but also to get her pension, which they just said she got her pension from the army.
Congress. The Female Review and Sampson Gannett's public performance were popular because her dual public image as a brave soldier and a traditional woman tantalized the post-revolutionary audience. By consciously refusing to be cast firmly in either gender role, Sampson Gannett insisted that she would be both and neither at the same time. This transgressive approach to gender identity was also present in an 1815 work of fiction titled The Female Marine, or The Adventures of Miss Lucy Brewer. Most
Period.
probably written by Nathaniel Hill Wright, an obscure Boston literary figure, it is a breathless, first-person narrative that frequently references Samson Gannett's life. The female Marine tells the story of a young woman who is seduced, impregnated, loses her child, and then is forced to work in a Boston brothel. She escapes and, dressed as a man, spends 3 years on the USS Constitution as a sailor. After many adventures, including potential romantic entanglements with women, she marries well. The female Marine was so popular that it brought forth 5 sequels, testifying to the enormous reader interest in cross-dressing literature. These sequels included a self-defense from the Madam of the Brothel, in which Lucy had been sequestered, and a new story of male impersonation by a character named Elmira Paul. The public interest in the topic of female transvesticism was not isolated to stories about these 3 strikingly different women.
Okay. I want to I'm going to interject something here. It's going to seem like it may not have nothing to do with it, but it does. Follow me. Y'all with me? Follow me. Okay. So they just outlined the female Marine. And so the story is talking about how she had this marriage that didn't work. Okay, clock the timeline of what happens in the story. She had this marriage that didn't work, but she got married. Remember, she got a marriage that didn't work, and then it didn't work, and then she left it and went on to be this cross-dressing Marine, and then started to work at this brothel. So clock this. She goes to be this cross-dresser, then she goes to be this prostitute. These are leaving the sanctity of a marriage to go to do these things that culturally are demonized as negative. And then when she lives this life, she goes back to what? A marriage. So clock that propaganda. She breaks a marriage, go through all of these problems, lesbianism, prostitution, cross-dressing. And then at the end of the story, she's back married, being a woman in her rightful place. This too is an agenda. This too is a story that is intended to tell a woman, a wayward woman, that when you lose your way, you get to get your life back right, you come back to marriage, being a woman, being the mom of the house, being the nurturing, being a mother, being covered under your husband, being a true chaste woman. Okay, so y'all get that propaganda. Now let me interject witches. Okay, y'all, we know what witches are, right? In all types of witches. We know what images we have of witches. Tell me some of the images that we have of witches that y'all have. What are some images, popular culture images that y'all have of witches? Give me some, not just right now. I know we have Wicked that's popular right now, but your whole life, what are some images of witches? What are some staple moments of staple images or tropes of witches? They're psychics, they're medicine women, the anti-Semitic noses. Explain that a little bit more. Anti-Semitic noses. What is that? Healers. Uh-huh. What are some of the it could be positive, negative. What are some of the negative? What are some of the positive about witches? Okay, yeah, psychic, different kind of powers, healers. Think black magic. Yes, think Hansel and Gretel. They eat kids. She tricks and lures them into evil spells, voodoo queens. She lures the kids into the oven to eat them, so they eat kids and they look old. Um, they're old and they're loners. They are alone. They are antisocial. They're alone in the woods. They're midwives. Um, what else? What else? What else? What are some popular witches that we know, like not necessarily real or whatever? What are some popular witches that we know from your time living? What are some popular witches? Um, Joan of Arc was died at the stake. Pointy hats, broomsticks, and cats. Absolutely. Joan of Arc was considered a witch, was burned at the stake as a heretic. Who else? Who are some of the people who are considered witches, even in fiction? Who else? Witches. Wicked Witch of the West, Marie Laveau, absolutely. More voodoo, but that's all in the witchcraft mystic. Absolutely, yes. Um, who else? Not necessarily a real person. Marie Laveau was a real person. Elvira, black, bang, titties boosted out, very sexual, men, conquering men. Elvira, absolutely. Empowered by her sexuality, empowered, sexy, definitely created for the male gaze, right? She was a woman, she was an empowered woman, but you can tell her image was for men. The witch in Snow White, absolutely, that gave her the apple. That the queen did the queen send her to Snow White? I think the queen sent her to Snow White. I think, or did or did the queen turn into the witch? I can't remember exactly the Snow White story. Did she turn into the witch, or did she hire the witch? I can't remember exactly. The old woman, like the crone, like in Snow White. Yes, absolutely. Um, yes, I can't remember. Did she? I can't remember which one it was. Did she? Did I can't remember. Anyway, but yes, the crone. Yes, they're usually old in the crone. What are some beautiful depictions of witches? Who are some famous witches? Um, beautiful witches. Are there any beautiful witches in pop culture? I'm saying all this stuff for a reason. It's gonna lead to something. Is Jezebel considered a witch? That's a good question. I don't consider her a witch. I learned that she was a spirit, not necessarily a witch, but I mean, I, I wouldn't be opposed to that. I wouldn't, that makes total sense to align Jezebel and a witch. Absolutely. They say Beyonce. Why do they say Beyonce is a witch? Why is that? That's a good point. They do. Who? Why? Because she mesmerizes you with images and sexuality and performance and all this imagery. Absolutely. She has mystic powers. Ogun? Ogun. Where you get Ogun from? Ogun isn't a witch. I'm a child of Ogun. Where did you get Ogun from? Charm, practical magic. Samantha. Samantha from Bewitched was a beautiful witch, right? Right? Wasn't Samantha a beautiful witch? Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Absolutely. So I want to talk about we just talked about this story of this woman um They just talked about the story of the woman leaving her marriage to do all of this cross dress and prostitution stuff to come back to a marriage, her rightful place. I want y'all to think about Samantha from Bewitched, also Galinda. Yes, Glinda or Galinda, depending on what book you're reading. All right, so I want y'all to think about Samantha on Bewitched. Do y'all remember? Am I showing my age? Do y'all remember Bewitched? The premise of the show. The premise of Bewitched, the show. What do y'all remember about Bewitched? Yes, she was married. A magical housewife, absolutely. She was a housewife, but she was married right, but had magical powers. She had the husband who was doted on her, but didn't know she was a witch. She twitched her nose. Yes. He ended up, I can't remember if he knew she was a witch or found out she was a witch. I can't remember. But at some point he did know she was a witch. And that was either I think he knew that she was a witch, but the agreement was that she would live the life of a typical urban housewife. That was the situation. When he didn't feel her, he banished her to the bottle. That's I Dream of Jeannie. He couldn't banish Samantha. We talk about Bewitched. I Dream of Jeannie was um that was he would banish her to the bottle. But that goes along with the point I'm about to try to make. Yes, that was I Dream of Jeannie. Yes. So, but Bewitched is more along the lines of what I want to make. So, the Bewitched is an American fantasy sitcom series that originally aired in 1964. This is the very first time that it aired. So, I want y'all to clock what's happening in 1964 for white women. We know what's happening for black people, but this is when the TV show comes out in 1964. So, we're talking about propaganda and stories. Okay. It aired from September of 1964 to March of 1972. So this is almost a 8 year span. So almost like a decade. Um, it is about a witch who marries an ordinary mortal man and vows to lead the life of a suburban housewife. All right. So that is what it is. That is what she is. She is a witch. She is a woman of power, magical power. So I want you to think about art and how it has an agenda and the time that they were in for women, 1964 to 1972. This is when the feminist mystique is coming out. We're about to go into the bra burning era, 70s, and we're about to go into where it's about to be the ERA. You get what I'm saying? It's about to go into that era of second, third wave feminism, I think. I can't remember exact timelines, but it's about to go in this era of feminism that we know. 9 to 5, what a way to make a living. This area. This is 20 years before this era. Okay. 15 years before this era. Okay. So this is 1964. So this series comes out about a woman, a witch, who has power to do whatever she wants. But she's vowing in her marriage to this man that she loves to not be the witch and use the power and be a typical suburban housewife. And so, if you watch the episodes, many episodes, this is Samantha belittling her power as a witch, cooking and doing all kinds of stuff that she can just twinkle her nose to do to please this man. So once again, we have a storyline created by men to be didactic, to teach a lesson to women. You feel what I'm saying? So she literally is belittling herself and not using her powers just to be this man's wife. And there was one episode, it was so funny, that she in the kitchen and she's preparing breakfast for Darren, her husband, who is upstairs asleep, and she's in the kitchen preparing and cooking. And she don't know how to cook. And she's like, oh, I need to do this. And so she's totally burning shit up and wearing it out and being late, and it's horrible. And he's about to get up and she's worried about it. And her mother, Endora, which was one of my favorite characters, Samantha's mother, Endora, who is a witch herself, a powerful witch, she's telling her daughter, bitch, she calls him Dagwood. His name is Darren, but she calls him Dagwood. And she talks hella shit about him. And she's trying to convince her daughter, girl, you are a witch. You are a powerful witch. You letting this dumb fool stop you? You got my grandbaby in this fucking house and you ain't using your powers. And so she is positioned as the villain of the show, who is trying to convince Sam not to be beholden to this mortal man's rules as a wife. And Samantha is always saying, girl, this is my husband, girl. This is my man. But her mother is coming in doing little tricks, using her own powers, but she don't want to overstep her boundaries as a mother-in-law. But she's telling her, girl, you could be out here wearing it out and you're not. But the agenda of the show is to tell women that it's okay to be a housewife. It's okay to reduce your powers. This is the best thing to be, for you to be in love and have a family. The agenda is for you to be in the house. This is 1964. The agenda is for you to be in the house to reduce your power, because the power and the beauty is in the love of your husband and you taking care of your home. And it's funny, at the end of the show, at the end of the episode, when it's time for him to come down for breakfast, it's so burnt up and messed up, but she don't want it to be burnt up and messed up for her husband. So she used her nose and used her power and say, damn, I done fucked it up. She does whatever the thing she does with her nose and makes the breakfast pretty and everything before he comes down for breakfast. And so he sits down at breakfast and tells her, oh my God, honey, this is just amazing. My toast, my eggs, my orange juice, da 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 da. It looks so amazing. She used her power to do it. And so the whole show is her trying to be normal. The whole show is her trying to be normal, opposed to actually using her powers to the best of her ability. She always used her magic anyway. Always. It's always that. She always end up using her magic anyway because it's just fucking silly. But she's doing it to please her husband and take care of her home and take care of her house. And so I wanted to point that out because in this story, that they just talked about, how it goes from you do all of this crazy cross-dressing and prostitution, and you get back to the marriage. There's a lot of stories like that where it will a wayward woman will go to a whole nother place and then come back to being a part of the marriage. And that is the point. And if you pay attention to a lot of stories in the time, especially like in the 60s and 70s and even Black stories, there is a story that the narrative is that you're going wayward and you come back to what the rules are. Come back to the family, come back to the church, come back to come back. A lot of Tyler Perry movies do this. Come back, you do wrong, you go cheat on your husband, and you go get AIDS and come back to the Lord. If you cheat on your husband, you're gonna catch AIDS and come back to the Lord. If you cheat on your you know what I'm saying? It's always Tyler always throws some kind of bullshit like that in his shit too. And so I want y'all to clock that T. There's a documentary about witches on PBS that is really, really good and talks about some of these images around women and how the image of women, the image of the witch has always been something used to demonize women. When we think about Marie Laveau and the legend of Marie Laveau, many of the legends were exaggerated because they were trying to demonize the women of that New Orleans culture. Old school propaganda, absolutely. They were trying to demonize the Black women of that New Orleans culture. So let's make them all into witches and heretics. And even the healers. Somebody said witches is healers, and midwives. If something is wrong with the baby and it comes out deformed, we can blame it on the healers and the midwives because we already made the propaganda that these type of women are evil. And so if something comes out wrong with my baby, I can blame it on her. I can blame it on the midwife. I can blame it on the healer and hang her. Clock that T. We already set up the environment to demonize these people as witches. Any woman loner, any woman doing magic, any woman doing anything that's remotely could be deemed as magical, we can demonize them. So yes, I wanted to talk about that. How art can can have an agenda, and it's usually an agenda that goes along with what they're trying to sell you in the moment about culture. And somebody mentioned the birth of a nation. The agenda of the birth of a nation was to demonize Black men as rapists.
Late 18th century American literature.
And if you pay attention, yes, the white man was dressed up in blackface as a Black man, but if you pay attention, that so that she would not get violated by the Black man that was chasing her, the white woman jumped off the cliff. So the narrative, not just the narrative of Black men being evil, over sexualized rapists. The narrative also is white women should also rather kill themselves and jump off a cliff than to be overcome by these sexual beastly rapists. Agenda, clock that T. Mary Tyler Moore came out a decade later in the 70s. Absolutely.
Literary and popular culture was obsessed with this new notion of the cross-dressed female warrior. Novels such as Charles Brockden Brown's Ormond or The Secret Witness, the memoir of famous cross-dressing British sailor Hannah Snell, a popular version of which was published in Thomas's New England Almanac, several plays based on the life of Joan of Arc, numerous broadsides of popular ballads detailing the exploits of cross-dressing female soldiers and sailors, all were extraordinarily popular with audiences. These sermons, books, lectures, pamphlets, novels, plays, and ballads struck a chord with the new American audience. Female and male readers saw themselves at the center of a whirligig, a quickly evolving culture that was breaking from the old world but not yet settled in the new. Howard Zinn points out that between the American Revolution and the Civil War, so many elements of American society were changing. The growth of population, the movement westward, the development of the factory system, expansion of political rights for white men, education growth to match the economic need, that changes were bound to take place in the situation of women. Certainly the examples of Wilkinson, Samson Gannett, and the fictional Lucy Brewer all point to new, if not explicitly articulated, freedoms that were opening for women in a country that was expanding on an almost daily basis. But they also are an indication of new ways of looking at gender. In highly public ways, these three women opened a liminal space in which new ideas and constructs of gender and sexual behavior could be discussed. In news reports and public presentations, both Wilkinson and Samson Gannett were mythologized, even fictionalized as much as Lucy Brewer. Historian Susan Juster claims that Wilkinson is best understood as a spiritual transvestite. She makes the point that Wilkinson took seriously Paul's claim in Galatians chapter 3, verse 28, that there is neither Jew nor Greek, there is neither slave nor free man, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. In this sense, Wilkinson's transvesticism is indeed spiritual. But it is also gendered. It can easily be understood as a purely American phenomenon that blurs the line between male and female, while at the same time creating the perfect U.S. citizen, literally, the public universal friend, who is both religious and secular. This image supports and yet contradicts the revolution's new gender roles, as well as the concept of separation of church and state central to the Constitution. To be neither male nor female, to experiment with coded representations of lesbianism, to banish, as Wilkinson did, traditional pronouns was a radical embrace of new articulations of public sexuality and understanding of gender. Can we call Jemima Wilkinson, Deborah Samson Gannett, or Lucy Brewer transgender or transvestite? Not by the standards and the vocabulary of their time. These women, however, helped set the groundwork for a national culture that was open to experimentation in gender and sexual identity. The connecting line moves backward as well as forward. It applies to the Enlightenment-influenced passionate friendships and the nationalized gender roles for women and men of the Revolution. Some of these new manifestations of gender behavior offered alternatives to social expectations, but they can also be seen as the building blocks to a more concise dichotomy between the public and private as a form of gender regulation. The reality of the persecuting society never completely vanishes from U.S. history. It becomes increasingly refined. In the colonies, social and political persecution of certain groups was relatively indiscriminate, making few distinctions among individuals within a minority group. Gradually, by the beginning of the 19th century, we see a growing cultural schism occurring between the private and the public, which was largely the reason people were able to explore non-traditional gender roles. It was permissible for women and men to have passionate private friendships, which may have included an erotic or sexual component, as long as they conformed to accepted gender norms in public. It was acceptable for women such as Samson Gannett to transgress gender norms in public as long as they adhered to traditional norms in their personal relationships. This increasing split in public spheres and private spheres was a major shift in how sexual behavior and gender, and also citizenship, were conceptualized. Full citizenship was, and to a large degree still is, predicated on keeping unacceptable behavior private. This complicated relationship between the public and private is at the heart of LGBT history and life today.
All right, so that's the end of this chapter. Sexually ambiguous, a sexually ambiguous revolution. And so I thought that was beautiful how it ended this chapter, because it shares with you how all of these rules culminated into what we started to see when it comes to the history of queer people in America. What we started to see is that what happens behind closed doors is your business, but what you do publicly is our business. So a lot of shit was happening behind closed doors. So this is also when we start to see the drag balls and things happening in the culture clubs that we started to see that was happening behind closed doors, sexual swingers and drag. When we think about William Dorsey Swan, William Dorsey Swan, or William Swan Dorsey, can't remember his name, but the first black drag queen that we think about, they were having balls that led us all the way to the fanny balls of the Harlem Renaissance. Do you see how these things started to grow because shit was happening behind closed doors? And that was the culture was saying, you do this stuff behind closed doors. You marry a man, but you have your dyke shit behind closed doors. You marry a woman, but you have your those sissy stuff behind closed doors. So it started to be these things that was happening behind closed doors. And so the next chapter talks about those things. And so the next chapter is called Imagining a Queer America. And we will discuss that another day. But I hope that y'all learned a lot. Thank you, Jenny Boom. I hope that you enjoyed this book. I really, yes, lavender marriages, absolutely. Um, I really enjoy this type of content. So if you enjoy it, make sure you thumbs up. I love discussing the things that I learn. A lot of times, I'm like in spaces where I'm, just discussing it with, you know, some other people. But I want to discuss it with everybody and use it as a moment of learning. And where we are examining culture and using examples that we see to make connections to some of the reading that I will be offering. So this is fun for me. I really like this. This is I feel like I'm in my teacher bag. And this is a part of, this is selfishly a part of me practicing because I am in the process of trying to become an adjunct professor. Um, yes, I am in the process of figuring out how I can work for a university here in Houston. And yes, um, so I'm practicing and I'm coming up with curriculum and figuring out what's next in that trajectory. But I'm loving this. This is fun. So yeah, do y'all have something that y'all want to talk about for the next 20 minutes? Or is this enough? It's almost 1 o'clock. 10, 20 minutes before we end it. It's 10 minutes till 12, child. And I have some shows to watch. You are gifted with speaking and storytelling and helping us see the connections. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Have y'all heard of is it not Meyer Briggs? It is another kind of not Meyer Briggs. It is another kind of evaluation. Yes, it's called Clifton Strength. Clifton Strengths. The Gallup Clifton Strengths. So this is, have you ever heard of that? I took that 2 times. Yes. So it is quite interesting that my top 5 strengths, this is my result. So my top 5, my 1 is a relator. So I know how to relate, context, adaptability, communication, and connectedness. So this is one of the most accurate ones that I've ever taken. Like I'm really good at those things. And it's 34. So my top ones are those 5. So the ones that are kind of they're not strength, but they're low on my list. Look at these. These are quite interesting too. So those are my top 5. So these are my top 10, I mean. So that's my top 5. My top 10 is individualization, responsibility, harmony, maximizer, and self-assuredness. Assurance. Um my My lower ones, so there's only 34, but my lower ones is quite so on brand for me. The last one is competition. I hate, and this is about work. So this is about career and work. So one of the things that I hate and I don't thrive in, I hate situations where I got to be competitive. I'm more of a team player. I am not a competitive person. That is not my nature to be competitive in any circumstances. That's just not me. I'm more of a team player. I want everybody to win. So that's just who I am. And so it's low and significance, focus, discipline, achiever. I am not I have my own level of what I want to achieve, but there's some people who chase like certain things and I'm like, "Ooh, I don't want to chase that. That ain't really what I want to chase." So it's I'm not chasing achievement. That's why it is and I'm definitely not chasing no fucking discipline. I am not somebody who works on a schedule real well. I like kind of like do it when I want to, when I feel like doing it. I even though schedule and discipline is important, you don't take that away, but that is not my strong suit. I need a flexibility around anything that I do. Focus. I have ADHD, child. I cannot focus on shit. I can focus, but if it's a freedom within what I need to focus on. That's why I can sit here and talk to y'all for 3, 4 hours because there's a freedom of what I can bring and talk about when it sparks my mind. And I can press pause and just and have my structure, but I need to go places I want to go. um yeah, I thought that this was so on point because it shows even my next one. Um Woo, I love this one. I love woo, positivity, analytical. I just love all of these input, including I love all of these. And so they're gonna be high in my navigating space because woo, I want to woo you. I want to look good and be, I definitely like fashion and being looking cute and looking decent. I like to do that in my work. In my work, I like it to be fire. So I think that this was such a great thing. So when somebody said giving context, there's a reason why I'm a historian because context is really really high and I'm really really good at making the connection with now with history in the past and circumstances and connecting the dots with people even if they think that they don't relate but they actually do. And so that is a strength of mine and I'm really really good at that and it's important to me. It's something that I need people to understand that we're not as disconnected as the world may seem that we are. So relator, context, adaptability. I'm really, really adaptable. Communication and connectedness. I think that those are strengths that I think are dope of mine. So yeah, context is my strengths up there with input, which is informative information collection. Input, information collection. Come on, data. You ain't about the rat race in this capitalistic hellscape. Yeah, even though I do want some coins, but it doesn't. I'm somebody who doesn't need to be rich, but I want my bills to be taken care of course. But but um, but yeah, not to the points where I'm sacrificing my integrity. Not that. I like to be good. Shout out to you and Monica Roberts. Yes, amen. Somebody tried to get me to do an event honoring Monica Roberts, and while I love her, always will. The money that they offered me was so disrespectfully low that I had to say no. Even though I wanna honor my friend, I had to say no because it was so disrespectfully low. Just so disrespectfully low. And, um, and I told them, I said, "Yo, I wanna honor my friend, but y'all not, gonna exploit me." Because one of the things that we had a problem with when Monica was alive was that she was winning awards and people were offering her disrespectfully low honorariums and payment. And we had to advocate. Literally, I had the password to her account so I can talk to people and negotiate prices with her because she didn't know how to do it. And so that was a problem. Her being underpaid was a problem with her life. So the fact that you're trying to honor her while underpaying a black trans woman is tone deaf and disrespectful. and I can't let you do it to me. Just like I advocated for her not to let you do it to her. So it would be really, really disrespectful and totally counterintuitive and just totally against what I stand for me to let you underpay me to honor her. And it's not about me being greedy and money hungry. It's about just the fact that you are somebody with some coins and you trying to honor this woman, pay me. I can honor her in my own way that I do, like I do all the time. But you're not about to exploit my labor, being performative around showing love to Monica. No, we're not doing that. But anyway, yeah, I thought that that was late. I thought that it was tired. And so we'll see. Oh, continue that exploitation of y'all labor. Absolutely. So, I'm excited about helping people see that connection and making these are fun. I love doing these. We're gonna do these are more serious books because I want to get y'all, you get what I'm saying? I want to talk about the serious topics that I love to talk about. But I also there might be some books later on that are more fun, that are more because I definitely want to do, let me see some books in my archive on my um so like there's one by Carl L. Hart called Drug Use for Grown-ups that I want to discuss. Um there is one called Mediocre White Men. It's called Mediocre, but it's about very few people of color did. It's about what is it called? Mediocre, the dangerous legacy of white male America. And I think that that is so, it's such a good breakdown of some of the our white male leaders and how they negatively impact us today, including like Joe Biden, because they go into a deep dive into his history before he became a senator, when he was, his early days. Um, yeah, I love. There's a couple of books that I want to kind of explore. Of course, The Trouble with White Women. We gonna talk about that. Um, you and Feminista Jones are sharing great content. I know her, but I don't. I used to follow her on Twitter, but I deleted my Twitter account. Now I'm on Blue Skies. So yeah, I haven't. Judith Butler, Undoing Gender is really really good. Um, she's on YouTube now. Oh, good. Bell Hooks Ain't I a Woman is a classic. We might go into that. Um, Becoming Abolitionist, which is about prison abolition. They Were Her Property Too is a good one. Cicely Tyson's book, Just As I Am. Fat Girl, Black Girl by Cecily Bowman is really, really good. It's like a fat black feminist text. My Story by Carolyn Crossy, white trans woman out of the UK, I think is she's still living and dope and amazing. I would love to talk about her. Um, Fearing the Black Body, which is good. Yeah, we got a couple of things. Killing the Black Body, we talked about that before. Purpose of Power. Deviant Wars by Eric Servini is really, really good. Eric Servini is the one that did the Book of Queers on. Did y'all watch Book of Queers on HBO? Watch Book of Queers, particularly the one about Abe Lincoln and the history of him being gay and queer. We talked about that. I gagged y'all at talking about that during the Luther Vandross review, documentary review. Make sure y'all watch um the Book of Queers. It's not just Abe Lincoln. It's multiple people that they break down in our history. Stamped from the beginning. Stamped There's a there is a movie called based on this book called Stamped on Netflix by Ibram X Kendi. Watch that, and the book is really really good because it just talks about the shifts in American culture. Yes, Steps by Ibram X Kendi. I love Stamped. Um, what else? Tressie McMillan Cotton, Thick. Um, Wayward Lives, Beautiful Experience by Sadida Hartman. Um, what else? Yeah, so many things. There's different ones that I kind of want to go over with y'all. All Boys Are Blue, we interviewed here on the show. In the archive of interviews that I have, we interviewed George M. Johnson. We can do his particular thing. Would y'all want to do some fiction or just keep it in nonfiction? Because we can do Toni Morrison, Sula. um, yeah, we can do a lot of stuff. Children of Blood and Bones. Oh, God, there's so many books I have on here. Diane Carroll, Legs Are the Last to Go. I would love to do that one, especially the episode about her and Diane Carroll's love affair with Sidney Poitier. Oh, baby, that was some mess, baby. We can talk about that. That's, oh, child. It was a mess. Yeah, so many. Both. I love nonfiction is my fave, though. Yeah, nonfiction is my fave, too. I even got Prince Harry's book, Spare. Let's talk about that. Feminist as Fuck by Brittany Cooper. Let's read Wild Seed. I haven't read Wild Seed in a minute, even though that is a good one. Love to see your fiction recommendations. My favorite fiction writers, I don't really read a lot of fiction, but my favorite fiction writers are um Stephen King. Stephen King, Toni Morrison, Margaret Atwood, she wrote The Handmaid's Tale. Um, Octavia Butler's one of my favorite is what Todd just brought up, Wild Seed, one of my favorites. Parable of the Sower. Um, Nonfiction. Yeah, those are my favorite nonfiction. Toni Morrison. Um, Stephen King, Toni Morrison are my like top. Those are my nonfiction. I'm really more into, I mean, in fiction, I'm really more into nonfiction. Um, yeah, I'm more of a nonfiction girly. That's my that's my tea. But fiction, if it grabs me, honey, I'll pull the page turner. But nonfiction is gonna be Toni Morrison, Stephen King. I can't think of anybody right now. Margaret Atwood. Yeah. But all right, y'all. I'm about to get up out of here. Thumbs up if you're watching. Thanks for watching. We will talk sometime between sometime this week. I will be in Las Vegas on the 20th. So that week of the 20th, I will be in Las Vegas for the Creating Change conference. But this week I will be home and recording and doing all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I will talk to y'all later. Bye.